the stream that was supposed to be for today. That's what I was saying about those knickknacks, man. There's so many of those little bitty knickknacks. It's like, all right, let's kick it off again then.
And a desire to nourish your essence within you have reached the realm of truth. Live from inner space, it's the next sequel to Interactive Enlightenment, brought to you by your host, Seven Bomar. Enjoy non-stop breakthroughs, advanced knowledge, and self-discovery to the core of your very essence. Join us as we map the blueprint to the cosmos and resolve the mysteries of the Matrix. You are now connected to the Keymaker.
As the world and time progresses at the speed of advancing technology, another all too vital craft is left in the shadows of ancient relics. The Keymaker sequel is an innovative spiritual revival designed to awake and unlock the cosmos within by restoring the codes and commands of a vast organic mainframe that encompasses both Earth and your own personal universe. Join your host, Seven Bomar, for an amazing adventure in uncovering life's greatest secrets that transcend beyond time and space.
Woo! Here we are. Wow, okay, so this may be working again. We're going to go ahead and get this thing crunk up. This is a very riveting topic that we're dealing with. And wow, me and my co-hosts have spent, honestly, the last 2 weeks working on not only this presentation, but the presentations to come. I will say this is the part one. This is by no means a complete exhaustion on the topic. It's not possible unless I'm going to hold you here for a few weeks in a straight conversation. But what we're going to do today is we're going to get this thing warm. We're going to jump right into this topic. We're going to see what we can learn together. And then most importantly, we're going to grow. We're going to connect. And that is my major goal or intention in this connection that we're having right now, is to see the unification of the human family, no one separate. And also, though, to highlight, who's perpetrating a great deal of this, this disconnection that we're experiencing in the reality, so we can move that out of the way. And then, since many are actual children of, if you can connect to some of these families, probably the children of some of these families, one way or another, it does give you an opportunity to really show up for your own family, basically. It allows you to show up for your own ethnogenic and ethnic group. All right, so before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and check on my chat really briefly. Like I said, we want to let this breathe a little bit, make sure everything is coming through clear. We have some slides today for today's presentation. I know we had a little bit of stream issues early on, but hopefully we have that fixed. So yeah. All right, so how you doing, Isaac? Like, how you feeling today, brother?
I'm good. I'm ready to go in on this. So.
All right. I've been pretty anxious too this morning. I did have some things that I wanted to get together, so it was like some last moment, like I got to get this in, which led to a little bit of last moment hysteria. But that's all good. That's all about how it works, and that's why we rehearse, right? So.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I feel like we should start with, that has to be, the way we bring this in, is actually with an honoring. And the word honoring, the reason why we use that word is because we started noticing words like offering, like off is at the beginning of that. So how am I going to do something that's supposed to kind of turn things on, and I'm going to start that with turning it off? Sacrifice is definitely not going to work. That's just, way out there. And ceremony is decent enough, but we like honoring. And this honoring replaces this idea of worship. Okay, because when you use this term worship, it actually means that there's a war going on, as in the beginning of the word, W-O-R, W-A-R, W-E-R. All these are the same thing, and they mean confliction, engagement, etc. And so when we're worshiping our ancestors, this act actually came from as everything began to degrade and the my dad beats your dad or my mom God beats your mom God started coming into play with the immature humans. And they started battling the deities against each other, just like you see in the Greek pantheon. Honoring is more of the realization that these gods, if you may, are actually ancestors of ours. And since they are ancestors, if we are to recognize them, we are to recognize them for their strength, their ideals, and the things that they delivered to us as their children. And so that then gives us this honoring component where we just honor our ancestors and remember them for what they've done. And all the way up until this point, some of the atrocities that have gone on, the men and women who've put in work in delivering the message or trying to maintain truth to certain extents, and all of that, we want to give reverence to that because that's actually brought us here where we are today. And sometimes because the past can be pretty brutal, you may think, well, you know, how am I supposed to come into some level of equilibrium in this space and time? And the only way that I was able to achieve that, because I can't answer that directly for each person, but the only way I was able to achieve that directly is by being comfortable with where I am now. So what I'm saying is if you're comfortable with where you are now, you're looking at internet, so you have internet, you can read all these different things, you know, you may have your mother, your father still living, you know, all the things you could be grateful for. You can still have fingers, you know. So if all of that is going on and you feel the power in that, then you're comfortable with where you are now. So that means that you don't really want to start tampering with the past, moving stuff around. And it's because every small thing you move around in the past brings you to an entirely different future. So this is how you can rest in contentment or fulfillment with where you are now, because you're absorbing this information and you're also in synchronization with others that are doing that same thing. And the ramifications of that are very deep. So I'm going to begin by first saying, you know, thank you to our ancestors for sojourning for us, for giving us this experience through the DNA, for raising us the best that they could, for teaching us how to live on this planet, who is also another ancient ancestor that has prepped itself to take us through an experience through its environment. And also our brothers and sisters, tribe members, which we include as the entire family of humanity, who have taken on different characters and different roles, some of them in contrast to what we feel like we want to enjoy in our future, which is great because contrasts always give us an ideal of what we don't want. So at the end of the day, sometimes we can see that all of the things that have happened are to give us an idea of how we want to create our world. And we're going to talk about that very heavy in today's conversation, the powers and the abilities to create your own world. But you kind of need a template. You kind of need some samples of what a world is really like, some base elements, what they call primitives in 3D CAD software. And so the primitives are the chairs, the love, the experience, etc., and all of those different things that actually allow you to, I would say in a nutshell, to begin to build your own reality, something like a Minecraft, if you may. So I'm going to go ahead and that's going to be it for my honoring. The rest, well, that first part, the rest of this entire presentation is an honoring from me and my brother to disclose some powerful facts about how we're functioning, to show that we are exiting the Kali Yuga. And this becomes very important for us to understand because it means that we're going into a new stage. And all of the things related to, let's say, darkness, or in this case perceived as ignorance, is over. And this enlightenment stage, which is just to become aware of the truth, is happening now. And many of us are sharing that information. There's lots of channels on YouTube. We got Secret Energy TV, or Mindful TV, excuse me, coming out on the 7th. And so these streams will be interrupted periodically through the day with more content that gives you some foundation on what we're going to be talking about today. And as I said, we have an extensive thing going on in the future with the Keymakers to keep drilling into this. And so if you find, we will have a Q&A later on, but if you find that something wasn't covered, don't worry. We have plenty of time for that in the future, and we can't cover everything during this conversation. So how are we going to jump off into this? Like, where are we at? What are we going to do here?
Well, Well, thank you, brother, for the honoring, and from the ancestors into action. We'll just hop right in.
All right, all right.
So let's give them the perfected ones, the Siddhas.
Okay, that's what's up. So the pretext to today's conversation is really about going as far back as it really matters. I would say it that way. So basically, if we go back 20, 30, 40, 50, 2 million years, all of that, like the authenticity of the data that you're going to be getting from there, hopefully it matches up to the blueprint perfectly and is about more of the primal composite of how we exist. Because if you're trying to be a fly on the wall in an argument between the Pharaoh and the Hyksos, what actually happened in that conversation may be a bit difficult for you to recount, since, after all, the victors write history. Right? So because of that, for us to go back as far as we can, for us, it's not necessary to go back further than actually 5,000 years. If you want to just get a really big idea of what happened, you can go back 10,000 years. But much of what you see during the times of struggle for humanity are the same things that you see now, mainly the wars, the racism, the lack of awareness, how we're all connected, you know, the separatism, the chosen one ideals, and all the things that actually separate a human race. And when you do that, what you're doing, whether you think it's right or not, is you're breaking links in the DNA chain. And since we all use the DNA chain as a way of, it's like a web that floats across the abyss. See, the abyss has no ends to it. There's no top, there's no bottom, there's no left, there's no right. So all we have is this DNA that contains all the memories of our experience that we live through. And it floats in the abyss like a web that we can walk across and that we can experience, right? So some say that's the planet. Some say that's the cosmos itself. Some say that's the unified field. So what I'm getting at here, though, that needs to be very prime in the realization of what these components are, is that we need each other in order to be able to expand this. So I can say, hey, what does it look like over there? And somebody say, hey, man, definitely don't take that. I'm still trying to get back. And I'll be like, okay, I'll send you a couple ropes. Meaning that through the experience of humanity and what we've gone through together in the entire spectrum, we're capable of drawing knowledge and experience and wisdom from each other. And when we break that connection for whatever reason, then it equals a Kali Yuga, meaning a stage of darkness or ignorance where we're not aware of the most common things. So my brother said, you know, we should probably jump into this by getting into the Siddhas, which are really one of the, basically the central characters in the theme for today, beyond Kali. And what these Siddhas are men and women who have, now Siddha has a tendency to be more specific to men, while Devas have a tendency to be more specific to women. Remember, we're talking about an entirely different linguistic system. But it is just the notion that the ability to attain a higher state has actually been more highlighted in the past than it is now. And in fact, many of our ancestors, like direct ancestors, worked themselves on increasing their spiritual power and their spiritual potential. And it was very specific, meaning that there was layout to how you would go through this process of activation. And this brings us actually to the Siddhas, because the Siddhas were men and women who had started walking up that ladder of lights, climbing their own spine, and began to activate these powers that the community also needed. So if you were sick, you could come to a Siddha and they would have a solution for you, because that's all they worked on. Many of these people were excluded to caves themselves. They didn't really want to interact with the overall populace because they were practicing extreme asceticism to see how far they can really go. And one of the most important things to realize about this stage, which we always need to realize about the spiritual context to things, is that not everyone was a Siddha. In fact, it's just like you see today, but based on the ratio. Obviously, there's 9 billion people here. There wasn't that many people in the past. But in that same ratio of how many people are working on spiritual growth, so too in the ancient cultures, there were just small groups of people who branched out to see if they could actually begin to unlock some of these powers and abilities. And if they did, then you could go and find them. They wouldn't come back. It wasn't like they come back, hey, look what I got, look what I'm capable of doing. It was not that. It was, if you need some healing, there's a Cd that lives in a cave over there, because those areas were really known by the people. Go to that cave and get some healing. And you can actually get that healing also for free, because anybody who generally got that healing, if they could give something, they gave it to the Cd. And that actually started the process of devotion. That started the process which ultimately ended in sacrifice when it was taken the wrong way. But just the notion that if someone's able to do some extraordinary things in your life and to really move some things that were hindering you out of the way, then it's just simple act of kindness to actually give them something so they can keep doing that. Because these are not the guys that are going to work, right?
So can we get the one sentence on who or what the Cds are, and then what they have to do with this ancient system of chakras?
Sure. That the Cds are in themselves human beings who have taken themselves through the process of activating their consciousness. So what does that entail, I guess, is the question. What is this activation of consciousness, right? So this word Cds, as a one word, means power, okay? Just the powers when you make it plural. But this word also, if we want to just check a little etymology, especially in the English culture, actually gives us the word city. As we know, everybody is in these cities right now. So you find an immediate connection, because if the Cds were where people went in mass at times to get healing and to find change and to find growth, the replication of cities, S-I-T-I-E-S, is actually somewhat the same thing, but grossly misconstrued, because the cities attract people. People come to the city finding jobs and protection, etc. But it's all external, right? So they're not looking for their own power. They're looking for the powers of the city in order to, you know, to be taken care of, to get their problems fixed. All right. So we have some notations here of what these Cds and powers are. And I felt that it was important to at least bring that forth first, because, and we'll slow down a bit here in a minute, but it's also because when you look at the New Age movement today, when you look at all of what we aspire to be, especially in the conscious community, meditations, etc., it all narrows down to the Cds and what was capable of being achieved once you were able to unlock these abilities. So obviously I'm not an expert on Sanskrit or Tamil, you know, but I'm going to go through some of these and we're going to start talking about, you know, like, what is that power connected to and how does it work? And of course we're going to also, you know, turn this into, you know, just a family gathering of getting this information and understanding, you know, what we're connected to, right?
So can we give a little context and background to the roots of the spiritual culture?
For sure. That the roots to our spiritual culture actually come from space, meaning it comes from observing the stars. So let's say initially our spiritual system that was in place came to us by the stars and next by the environment. So a simple observance of how things moved or how things changed throughout seasons actually gave us the ability to develop a spiritual system of belief that took us from the base area, in this case the Kali, which is even lower than the root chakra itself, and all the way up through the system of colors, as we would say, the ladder of lights, and then bringing us into this awareness of who we are totally as a being of the cosmos. So in short, this spiritual system that we're going to be highlighting today, that has been taken by others, used by others, excluded from other people, etc., was actually something that was written in the stars and not something that was just available to only a select group of people. Does that make sense?
It does, but taking it from the stars and the cosmos, do we want to ground it into Lemuria and Tamil Nadu?
Yes, we can do that linguistically. And the reason is because if we take let's say the Essenes, which were known to watch the stars. These ancient groups of learned men, some call it the Gnostics, and what they were doing, even Shiva looking up at the stars, like what were they doing? They were spending their lives accounting the positions of the stars because they felt that that had an extreme importance to what was going to come next, how we were functioning now, and what happened in the past. So in utilizing this system to more or less read time, it became the go-to for how to put ourselves into the proper order. And so I think that the easiest way to start disclosing some of this, especially in relation to the culture, if we're going to trace it into the language, is to also see that what the language does is it either connects constellations, like I used to say early in the game that, hey, it looks like somebody played a dot to dot with the cosmos and developed a lot of alphabets or, you know, certain symbols. So many of those symbols actually do come from the essence of the stars. And I would love to have some you know, just some imagery on that, but it's basically in essence saying that our language is tied generally directly into our beliefs. So at any point that we're removed, or not so much as our beliefs, but what we know, and any time that we're removed from our language, ignorance ensues. It's almost as if we forget all of this knowledge. And I think that's equally important to connect it to the Tamil Nadu region because of the antiquity of the language itself. And also our ability to be able to take this language as we learn it and decode words that later on came into the Latin, the Vulgates, the hieratic and demotic scripts that came before that, etc. And show the connection between the concept of what the word says. Because if we remember this time, let's say in the Bible, that God tells Adam to name all the animals. Now here we go with the fictitious stuff, but let's just look at the action. Name all the animals. So if you were given that responsibility, yo, name all the animals, what would you name them and why? And so what we find is that actually the reason how people named animals was actually based on the sounds they made. So the meh of the goat became the word massum, all right? And many of the caca of the crow became known as the kakamuri. So there was many different animals who made a sound as if saying, no, here's my name already, I'm telling it to you. And then the first languages were developed off those sounds. And also languages were developed with how your body actually moved or how you felt energy move when you said those words. So because language in itself was not something that we all had at one time, like even the Tamil language has over 300,000 words. So obviously those words weren't just dropped out of the sky. They were developed over a period of time to make a perfect language that connected with how we functioned in daily life, how we articulated ourselves, and how we could continuously go into greater levels of knowledge by observing the differences between certain vibrations and other vibrations in the linguistic system. So somebody obviously wanted to perfect that system, and that's what we're talking about when we're saying the Siddhas, greater perfection of this system.
Got it, got it. And are there a few words that you would like to go in on and highlight as far as etymology that will help us understand this system?
For sure, like, and even before we get into the etymology, you know, I think that it's imperative for us to really just talk about these Siddhas and powers first, because the etymology is a very lengthy topic. I spent like 10 years understanding etymology. And one of the big things about etymology is that you have to be willing to understand how to stretch words. Like in English, or in Latin, for instance, the V oftenly interchanges for the B. So there's a lot to learn about linguistics. So what happens is that many words actually don't bear linguistically, when you see them written, sometimes similarity to the ancient words because so many things have been changed. But often through the tones and the vibrations, you find the connection. And we'll actually be going through some etymological words during this presentation just naturally. And I know it'll click for people that, oh, wow, that's why that word connects to so many different things, rather than us just exhausting etymology at this point in relation to this topic. But again, to segue into more of what this is really about also, we really want to talk about these Siddhas. We want to talk about how these powers are associated, so that way we can open up the vista here a little bit, because there's one respect to this, that we need to be talking about these cultures in real time, about what it's like to just to be human in that time, and not add components like entheogens and aliens into the conversation, because it's just going to get us confused. And then there's other aspects to where we have to know that there are things like entheogens present that open up an entirely different vista. So it gives us a limitless potential of what could happen. So it makes really some of this a lot more plausible and a lot more believable. So when we go through these siddhas, like let's say for instance, and again, I'm not a professor at Tamil or a professor at Sanskrit, so I may pronounce some things the wrong way, but I'll do my best. So if we look at this Parakaya Pravesh, it's placing one's soul into the body of another person. And I feel that this is the route to Immaculate Conception and raising the dead. This is an ability that can be achieved by unlocking certain chakras, and it gives you the ability to literally transfer your energetic field into something else. You can do that as being an infinitesimally small creation, meaning almost inseminating something and then living through it. And this is actually really the story behind the devas, is that inside of the devas, which were women, lived like a microcosmic perfected form, a Siddha himself or herself, and they inspired that deva to bring different prophecies or to heal in certain ways or to know certain knowledge. But just this act of being able to put yourself into another organism, it opens up a broad extent of many of the encounters that people have said they've had, from familiars to, you know, other entities that they've met, etc.
Brother, I know there's about 8 or 9 of these powers that we had. Can we hit those a little rapid fire just to lay them out?
Absolutely, yeah. We can go some rapid fire on this. So let's say okay, so we're gonna go rapid fire. So infinitely small. Get my screen capture back up here. So we're talking about placing your body inside of another person, and actually even placing your body inside of something that may be inanimate or dead, and actually bringing it back to life. We have another one called Hadividya, which is no hunger, no thirst. A nullification of oxygen, meaning not even a need for oxygen, extensive fasting, and no bowel movement. And I actually was on the phone last night with my brother Mark, and he was talking about how some siddhas had taken a vow to stand for 12 years. And the big confusion was, how do they use the restroom? Well, if they're not eating and they're not drinking water, there's no restroom to have. So there's no bowel movement to have. So the main point here with these powers is to go beyond what would be the standard klipot or drawback of the human body. So you have Kadiyaviya, which is changing the seasons. The change of the seasons have no effect. And this is big because the environment often controls a lot about how we function, how we think. And this power is tied into that. That doesn't actually have power over you. Even full moons, suns in certain cycles, etc., it all has no power. As we move on, we also get the Animasiddha, which is becoming as small as a particle, which connects kind of to that first Siddha power. And this is also giving you the ability to increase your size exponentially. So if something needs to be lifted, if you need to go into another space, or in either way, like either really small to get in there or really large to get up there, this is a power, this is ability. We have the Vayu Gaman Siddha, which is the flight into teleportation, which some are even familiar with now and experiencing the height of astral travel, hyperdimensional travel, teleportation, again, physical flight, levitation, etc. This is where all that comes from. And then finally here we have the Kandura Cd, which is basically unlimited wealth. It's even beyond the increasing food, increasing abundance, like thinking about the 5 loaves and 2 fish parables of Krishna, which was known as the Christ, but being able to feed people with a small amount, take a small amount and feed a large amount of people. Then we have Prakara Sadhana, which is making a barren womb fertile. And anything barren fertile, even if it's a desert, if it's a dead tree, if it's a woman that can't birth children, bringing fertility back into that womb, which is definitely someone that has the ability to see into those metaphysical planes to see what is the blockage or the issue. And then finally, as written here, because there are some more, but we just want to detail these 8, the Surya Vigyan, which is using the solar rays to transmute one thing into another thing. Oops. I went back on my slides there. So that's it as far as what we have today on the Cetas, but just to give an idea of what we're talking about. Again, that using the solar rays to transmute one thing into another, I feel like is also very key. All these we could drill into, but we're not going to today. But if you just imagine that since this projection that we're in is generally sprayed from the sun, if you have access to that ray before it touches whatever it is supposed to become dense and form into, you can change what it's forming into. And that gives you one of those final powers. And the way to attain those powers was what they call Ashitas, which was basically awakening through herbs. And this gives us like the shamanistic traditions of using the ayahuascas and the DMTs and the peyotes, etc., to bring about different spiritual powers. That was not the only way, however, and actually there was generally strict asceticism often practiced in place of that, meaning no drinking water, fasting, those kind of things to bring about enlightenment. And then last but not least, or probably not even last, there was Shakti, where your master, teacher, guru, or whatever could actually transfer to you energetic energy that would give you, or energetic potential that would give you some insight into what those powers would be like. And then as you ran out of Shakti, which is like fuel, you would still be inspired to continue your process of building Kundalini so you can achieve those points.
So it's easy to understand where your X-Men, your DC, your Marvel comics got some of their material when we're talking about these superpowers and traits of a Cetas. Are we ready to dial all of this into the ancient system of chakras based on color?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Going in the danger. He breathes.
Oh, yeah.
All right, well, here it is. Here it is. Yeah, because there's a little bit more on the end of this conversation, so we want to speed through this as fast as possible, and then others will have the opportunity to ask about any of these things if they want to know a little bit more about it. So let's go ahead and dive right into these chakras and how they connect. Now, of course, for those that are adept on the line, they already know a lot of this, but there are people here that are not aware of these things, so we want to make sure we're completely cohesive since we're starting off below the base of things, building this foundation. So, of course, many know that the chakras, go ahead.
And also, brother, you know, everyone has something to say about chakras. So I know we're going to deliver it real clear and concise.
Absolutely. As clear as concise as possible is to see that the chakras are like the planets in the cosmos. There is more than 7 chakras. And as you see here on the charts, you have several points in the body that actually could be perceived as stars or planets, some being primary, some being secondary, and some in development. Just like chakras, you have primary chakras, secondary chakras, and chakras that are being developed. Chakras have a tendency to develop in certain age ranges, and this is why there was a profound system in the past of 7 stages to where the chakras were developed in a color system. And then as you went through that process, you would experience different things, and they try to generally iconize what you would experience in an image. Those images later on became known as the pictures of God. Okay, so in these images, let's say the ones that we're looking at right now, you're seeing the real God, who is humans. And they have inside of their body these clusters, these nucleuses of power that when activated and turned on and spin and begin to, when they begin to spin or work in conjunction with one another, they create what we just highlighted before about the Cetas, but you start from the beginning. So you can start seeing here again with another image that you have, again, these chakras placed inside of your body. And they can be seen, as we even say, the Keymakers. The Keymakers originally arise from the idea, because the chakras have these very unique geometries inside of them, of finding a unique key to unlock that chakra, to unblock it, to keep it from being stuck. And now that we put an S on Keymakers, that's more about the people that we're going to be bringing into the show that are also going to be highlighting some of the things that we talk about that have a greater profession in these areas, so we can keep drilling in. So in conclusion, as it's stated, the chakras are actually inside of the human body. Some of them are activated, some of them are dormant, some of them activate based on age, some activate based on herbs, some activate based on experience, conditioning, etc. But when they do activate, especially in conjunctions with others, they bring you into a greater stage of awareness. Is that good? Good on that?
Yeah, that was lovely. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and just the opportunity to bring forward or present, you know, how we can really internalize this.
For sure. Like, well, I guess the greatest level of the realization of our internalizations of these powers is actually in what the New Age community has at least caught on to today, which is the acts of the meditations, the acts of, you know, working on non-judgment. I think my entire body of work for the last decade has really been about activation of chakras, but we can see that it doesn't always entail just such direct application. It could be something that is hidden. It could be something that you need to experience, some place you need to go to activate these certain centers. So, you know, rather than exhausting the topic itself, which we can have other space to do, it's just a sheer awareness that there are power centers inside of your body that are responsible for even why you can stand up. Like right now, we have a field that is moving around the body rapidly that makes it very easy for us to stand up. And anytime that you've been in a deep meditation, you'll notice that even if you lean back a little bit, you almost start feeling like you're brushing against some kind of field that's moving around the body. Some that have prayed extensively or honored extensively, notice the body will naturally start doing this. Some cultures actually do this on purpose just to try to bring about that same change. Same thing with the whirling dervish, right? They spin and spiral like the cosmos in order to activate certain alignments within their consciousness and to spin straight. So you can imagine when you have that huge, and I don't know what it's called specifically, so I don't want to disrespect it by calling it a dress, but when you have that bell on, if you may, and you start spinning and that thing gets going and then you're now into that perfect position, you start to spin like a top. And the more that you do that, it's just like any kind of dynamo. It starts bringing other parts of the system online. So that's what we're talking about when we're saying, you know, how these chakras are used and how they work in conjunction with what we're doing, but also how mystical they are, because although they're present, we have a tendency to not see them or recognize them. And one more final thing is about how the chakras connect to the organs, because if we miss that, then we kind of miss like one of the major components that ties it all in for those that are not aware of this knowledge, and that's your organs, which are named appropriately. If you know, in the church, they play the organ, it makes the sound. Your chakras all play a specific sound that allows them to do what they do in the transitions of your body, the processing and things that need to go on in your body. So what sickness is when that organ is no longer playing harmonic with the orchestra. And then it also begins to drag down the rest of the chorus by playing off tune. And then other organs are forced to try to compensate for the lack of performance from that particular organ. So also, listen to these metaphors because they work in different aspects of life, because they're maxims and ultimate truths. So let's just say that again, when a chakra fails, disease ensues. Lack of awareness ensues. And this is the connection between our organs in our body, which are seen metaphysically as the planets, and the chakras inside of our body, the tones that they play, humanity being themselves singing a song or in an orchestra together, even if some are off tune. And then the ability of being able to use things like tuning forks, mantras, vibrations, tones, ra, ma, like being able to tune your chakras, if you may, like you would tune your own self like an instrument.
Okay, so let's take a walk down the historical narrative that we began in Lemuria, and let's speak on the Deluge and the different aspects of that.
Absolutely. Let's jump into the Deluge. So the Deluge in itself, some can see it as a metaphor, some can see it as an actual event. Some can even be deluge in this day that we're living in now, because there's different aspects of a deluge, right? There could be a mental deluge where every single thing that you once knew is lost. There could be a physical deluge like we're going to talk about right now, where you have an entire continent underwater, and there is proof that, as you're seeing on this map, that continent right there is underwater. And even to this day, which they don't allow many people to go out here, but there are some documentaries that were done by, I believe, ABC, and the History Channel has some stuff where some people that were very curious about this idea of a deluge went out to these areas, did some diving, and about 5,000 feet down, found an entire city. Okay, and in fact, as we keep going, we're going to be disclosing where the real locations of things like Atlantis are, etc. But right now, we're focusing on Lemuria, or what we're calling Lemuria, or Mu. Now, as you see, it has a different name here because most of these names have been changed. But it's the sheer identity that there is a continent that was in an area that was completely submerged. And that area was crunk, meaning that, let's go back real quick, that back in the day, since the population is not very high anyway, mankind is actually in this act of growth. And so any other human is actually really seen as a friend. There's not much conflicts. There's enough things to be going to war with or fighting with, like the animals and the elements, right? So in this period, what we find is we find that everyone condensed, or a lot of people condensed themselves into a specific area, and we had what would be seen as a golden age, where all these arts, which we just talked about earlier, like that are really delivered from the awareness of your own consciousness, are then brought out into the physical reality, which actually gives us our word technology. A technology is anything external to yourself. So the technologies were at their height in Lemuria in this specific area, and for one reason or another, which I haven't really destroyed my brain in trying to figure out, it all sunk. And the result of that was much of what you see here now in some of these images. There's plenty of images about this, especially as you begin to realize that the Sumerians were actually people who fled from this Indus Valley culture. Then you can see it then everywhere. Also, you understand the Mayans also fled from this activity from Kumari. And so in these pictures, as you're seeing on the screen, you're seeing 3 different cultures saying that they experienced this deluge. And now I know this in fact to be a fact because now when you look at this map, where that red triangle is actually where that continent was that I was pointing out that is underwater. And when the people that were inhabiting that continent had no choice but to leave, then it brought about these different civilizations as you're seeing on the map. Some of them fled into Africa and became known as the Nagas there. Some fled into the Berber, which are now known as the Berber. Some became the Greeks. Some became the Sumerians. Some became the Chinese. Some became the Nagas that you still see over in Australia or New Zealand, right? And then all the way as far as the Americas, which is the Native Americans, because, you know, the gig is kind of up. You know, if we play the separatist game all of our lives, you never see just how connected everybody really is. And it works kind of like a marker running out of ink. If you're able to jump to the next racial group, you're actually able to see the connection in the racial group that comes after that. And that all being predominantly controlled by the environment that these groups inhabited.
So, you know, we're living in a time where there's quite a bit of migration of peoples across the world. Is there anyone that you want to highlight, specific groups after the deluge?
For sure. I think that the culture that you're going to really, well, between the Sumerian and the Mayan cultures, you're going to see more of this evidence than pretty much anywhere else. And it's because these two cultures not only survived the deluge, but actually got to a stage of flourishing again. So if we look at the Mayan empires and all the imagery and the culture, what we find is that after fleeing from the deluge, then they went into Peru. And many of the cultures that we see around that area all center around these ideals that we're going to be talking about that these ancient people shared about what they believed in, like the 7 steps of the pyramids that we see even now as the Sun Temple, the 7 days of the week, the 7 primary celestial bodies. All of these things come from an original culture, and then you can start tracking that culture as you see them begin to spread that knowledge to other places, that you see them begin to share that knowledge to as they travel. So you can find them based on their symbolism. Just give me one quick moment here. I'm going to get some things. You can find them based on their symbolism and the call tags, if you may, which we have some coming up. But the call tags of these cultures, or this specific culture as it spreads out from this area.
Okay, so we're going to go in on some of that culture.
Yeah, let's do it. So what we have next here first, before anybody feels excluded, because it's important for us all to realize how unified we truly are. The only thing that can prove to us our unity is actually our language. And it is very important to understand that even in the Bible, when it says God, who in this case is Germanic king, says, let us go down, meaning he's talking to his vicegerents and people that are a part of his aristocracy, going down because they're actually in the north, so they're going to go down to the south and confuse them with what? Language. And this linguistic confusion actually creates a lot of the confusion that we're seeing today, where you have entire cultures that connect to other cultures, but they don't acknowledge that connection. And in fact, they fight and war with each other as if there is no connection at all. That happens first in language. Once you take someone off of their linguistic system, or you even remove certain components, this is akin to what can happen in hypnosis if somebody tells you, you no longer remember 3 anymore. 3 is not a part of your vocabulary. It's not a part of your reality, not now. And a person's hypnotized into believing that. Now, if a person's ever seen hypnosis, you know that that's actually one of the major things that hypnosis do to show you the level of their abilities, is they make people forget certain things. And even when they bring those people out, but they have them forgetting that one little small part, they can talk to them like, count on your fingers, and the person will go 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and totally skip 3. Because that's what hypnosis is capable of doing. And since we've now come to the conclusion that the entire world is probably under some level of mass hypnosis or spell, you can see how language plays into all of this, and that if you remove certain parts of the language, you remove an entire awareness of the person themselves. But what I'm showing here is I'm showing that in the Scythian ruins, we find that the linguistic systems that are being used inside these cultures, such as the Tethana, are virtually identical, minus a few additions, to the ancient Tamil language. And while we can again exhaust this linguistic topic in the topic of etymology, which we would do a little bit of in the future, we just want to prove right now and show clear proofs that no culture should feel excluded from the acts of Lemuria in the Indus Valley as if they were not present, or as if they were the ones doing the attacking. This is a major misconception that is constantly happening as people try to figure out who is responsible for the dissolution of the human species at this point. So it's important for us to all move on and realize that most of us are the children of all of these different cultures that split apart and became, practicing their own ideals. But the history or the linguistic system is going to show us the connection. So there's a connection between Slavs. Like, I've always wondered personally why Slavs had that name, because it is really close to slaves. And I was always like, even when I was younger, are Slavs the real slaves? But of course, there was no connection because the Slavs are melanin recessive. However, there is a connection that the Slavic language, as there's videos on YouTube and scholarly reports about now, the Slavic language is actually directly connected to Tamil. And it's not just that language. It's a large amount of languages, including Sanskrit. So there's been a real let us go down and confuse them by changing the languages. And these slight changes to the languages, especially to cultures that had already broke off from the Deluge, actually governed and created a feeling that they were developing something separate or had created something unique, when in fact, that was all a part of the ancient culture. So just taking a moment to show the connection again between all races, no matter what color they are, in this specific Lemurian continent.
Are we ready to, so we have those two ideas of culture, okay? So we have, a more present day divided idea of culture where there's different and separate cultures versus this ancient culture where we're all together and we share a common birthright. Are we ready to get into a bit of what that birthright is of that nation altogether?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's keep it rolling. So last note is to remember, deluge happens. That shit happens. Deluge happens. Deluge happens now. So different parts of the world, as what's being shown geologically, go into entire deluge states a lot more faster than what people think. Like sometimes, science has these exhausted numbers. Physics has these exhausted over 5 trillion years. And they do that on purpose, because once you hear those numbers, the last thing you think is about it happening during your lifetime, right? Seeing you only live 70 years. So again, one of the most important things is to remember that these different cataclysms that happen to different parts of Earth occur frequently as every 300 years, every 500 years, not every 50,000 years. So because of that, again, just highlighting that deluges take place now. So it's not uncommon for an entire place to be underwater if certain geological changes happen. And then this then brings us, excuse me, one second, let me just switch my switcher here because it wasn't on. This is the image that I'm showing, which is again, deluge. Happens all the time. There needs to be recovery after this, and it's just good that now, let's say the world is developed in other areas, so recovery happens a lot faster, right? Technologies are in place, they're preserved in other areas and able to be bought in and fix situations. Back in the day, when something like this happens, everybody just needs to leave. This is like a Katrina situation. Everybody leaves, and then until the water sinks, and some people that know about irrigation and all that kind of stuff get in there to change up the area so they can be inhabited again, it remains mostly desolate. And then if it goes under the ocean altogether, then we never even know that situation existed unless, or that civilization existed unless a diver goes down there and discovers that. So going further, go ahead.
So, you know, we're looking at the deluge, not just as a physical aspect, but as a disconnect point or a disconnected state of being where some of this this culture either you know was lost or covered up, as in flooded, or was taken and maybe changed or inverted.
Yeah, I would definitely say, you know, if you experience a deluge, like let's say, for instance, those people who left Katrina, they had to start all over again. So when you have to start all over again, maybe someone that's a little bit further along can take advantage of you. You're kind of like living in someone else's house after that. So when a deluge happens, even environmentally, it happens in your life. Like I saw some footage just recently about the scenario that happened in Indonesia with the tsunami. I mean, you have a mother that's lost her entire family, and she's the only one that survived. I mean, you have countless stories like this. So there's this real need then for Earth to kind of move in, or humanity to kind of move in to assist those who have participated in the deluge. But if you have kind of the opposite going on, where some look at that as a weak point of being able to take over the entire empire, etc., then yes, you get what we would say is culture vulturing. You get a complete desolation of that culture, and then it kind of being taken by someone else, and then even the original people never being able to really recover to represent themselves again. So, you know, this is some pretty deep stuff that we're talking about.
Got it.
So now we're going to get into the slightly heavier stuff. You know, now we know we gave the preface. Yep. And as I was explaining to everybody, remember that everybody is connected in these Isles of Lemuria. But after that, we just had situations like the Mahabharata, 5,000 years of war, right? And even right now, the Mahabharata is hopefully over, but still continues. Right? Or we want it to be over, but it still continues. War still happens. So in warlike scenarios, you got to remember that certain things happen. First of all, the victors write the history. Second of all, because there is no telephones, there's no computers, there's nothing that a person can communicate at great lengths to another person, information that they would need to know about something that just happened. You can often have an entire nation disposed and the surrounding nations not even really be aware of it and still actually think that they're communicating with the leaders of that nation. And that's done through the signet rings, the actual seals, the symbols that represent the culture. So the king, this symbol that you're seeing is actually a symbol that belongs to the king Murugan, which is another episode that we're going to have here on the Keymakers. It's like the pair to the Kali episode, just so we disclose all of what's happened and the individuals that are involved and how the knowledge got tarnished. There's going to be more of how the knowledge got tarnished in relation to that, because we got to deal deeply with symbolism. And this is an example of that symbolism.
And who were, you said kings, so who are these kings post-deluge?
Anyone who can claim the title of king. Okay, so remember, post-deluge, as we talked about earlier, the kings are the Siddhas. Okay, this word king is a Germanic word, so we have to go back to the Tamil and say, and who is the king, right? And the king is based on spiritual attainment, and I'm working on finding just my chart of that spiritual attainment really briefly, and I guess this may give us some little insight right here, but it's just the reality that you have a stepped system of spiritual attainment, and whoever reaches the top, which is not really a competition, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to practice extreme aesthetics to be there. So even if you're thinking, I'm going to become the highest Siddha so I can become king, you're never going to get it. That's almost like saying that you want to activate your meditative powers or your astral travel so you can control everybody. And anybody who is aware of those powers know that they shut off when you're trying to do things like that. So when we say, well, who's the king, or who's the Raj, or who's the Nisut Bit, who's the Pharaoh, who's the, in every culture, especially the ancient cultures, and only thing is now the modern time doesn't reflect much of this because we have surrogate kings and surrogate queens, but they were people that were trusted amongst the tribal community to deliver the knowledge of the direction that everyone should be going. So king wasn't something that was just this divine birthright that you earned it because your father was the king. It was something that you needed to obtain spiritually, and people put you into that position so that way you could continue with the direction and the directive that is needed often for large tribes. So are we crystallizing a little bit more for everybody exactly what king is, or do we need to drill into that a little bit more?
You know, I'd like to just continue connecting, you know, post-Deluge, this idea of kings and what they're doing with the culture.
Okay, so at this point, we have a lot of self-appointed kings after the Deluge. Before the Deluge, everybody's on the spiritual system, so they know the people that they have as their leaders are the ones who have achieved at least the stage of being white as in Brahm, meaning pure, no more ignorance, okay? So those who had achieved that state naturally went into that position. That's like when you see the Council of Elders, right? You always see the Council of Elders, they got the beards and everybody's old, they know about the knowledge, etc. So when we're dialing into all of this, what we're saying as who is the king, we're saying that before the Deluge, the kings were appointed based on their activities. After the Deluge, anyone could really become a king because everybody was trying to regroup. Now, there were some kings that survived. That's another conversation. But we also have some kings that became king because they could either fight wars really well, warrior kings. They had knowledge about things like agriculture. Maybe it was just a simple cow herder, but he survived. So when he goes out, he's now able to use this knowledge that he's already had about herding cows. And then he becomes the one with the most cows. He becomes the king. So you have a lot of self-appointed kings after the Deluge, but not really before then. So I think that's a big point.
This is very easy to understand from, you know, any type of geopolitical or historical perspective. When you see an event like the Deluge, or any type of chaos and destruction, it leaves a power vacuum.
Power vacuum, exactly.
And if we're talking about power, you know, it can be an internalized, you know, process if you're making it about you and
exactly.
your chakras, or it could be the externalized version of it.
Absolutely.
And you dropped the name. I don't know if we dropped it yet, but you did start going on the Brahmins. So what do the Brahmins have to do with this power vacuum?
Sure. Well, the real Brahmins, nothing. The fake Brahmins, everything. And this is what we want to drill into, right? Is we want to kind of disclose, or not kind of, but we want to disclose, like, you know, what is Brahm, okay? And first and foremost, and I didn't get a chance to load my chart today in here, unfortunately, but I just want everyone to realize that as you're seeing these 7 Amons, which became known as angels later on, and you could see that they're actually predominantly feminine. And it is because of the act that, again, the inspired entities that were outside of this space, meaning that they didn't have physical bodies, if they wanted to come back into this space to influence things, to teach their children or whatever, they would use that process of inseminating a woman, and then that woman would become a deva because she would exhibit godlike traits, if you may, and be able to prophesy and know about great things, etc. And so that was normal. But there's another pairing to the devas, and they're male. So if we look at the white Aman here, that is Saraswati. So her equivalent as a male is Brahma. So the easiest way to understand this is that each of these stages pair up with a male and a female aspect. And the male aspect of the highest stage that you can receive in physicality, which is the white stage, the pair to that is the female Saraswati, the male Brahma, which later on becomes Abraham and Sarah, but we won't get into that right now. It's just important to understand that Brahma is Brahm is a title. It is not a specific person, and it just means a male that has achieved the highest level of spiritual attainment that the people recognize, and they're willing to put them into a position of power and a position of judgment. Because the other thing we need to know is that let's not kid ourselves. Just because, you know, there was, even before there was troubles and dispositions, warring tribes and those kind of things, it didn't mean that people didn't have common disagreements. You know, he just, you know, his cow ate up all of my grass, or his children are playing in my field. So all those different kind of things needed to be sussed out by somebody. That was the Brahmins, or those who are put in a position of power and judgment. So you can also see why that becomes the position that creates the power vacuum when the real Brahmins are removed. Now, there's some characteristics of the Brahmins as we see in modern times that are pretty replete, and it's generally the white beard. I always say now the modern Brahmin is basically Santa Claus. And it's just because that the entire tradition has been taken, and then some of the aspects of the aesthetics of the tradition itself has been put into another place. So just very clearly, when we're saying, okay, so who is this Brahma? Where does that originally come from? Who can we trace it back to? We have to start looking at symbolism. Because once you know the symbolism of Brahm, then you kind of know, when Brahm is present. So here we have the symbolism of Brahm, okay? And this is under the king Murugan. So Brahm is also synonymous with king. And Murugan has a six-pointed star, which actually is synonymous with his 6 faces. And this started way before anything like Judaism began. So this is why when I say King David had nothing to do with this star, it's because this culture tops is no more older than 3,000 years tops, while this culture is at least 6, 7, 10,000 is, pretty far back. So you know which one preceded the other is what I'm saying. But you have people in the modern times now, or cultures, or entire religions, using this symbolism and not actually giving any credit to the originators of the system.
So what are the Brahmins doing specifically with the ancient system of spiritual ascendants in the chakras and the colors of the chakras?
Nowadays, again, I guess we're going to have to say fake Brahmins versus real Brahmins, okay? Because that just, it helps. The fake Brahmins, what they've done is they've rewrote all the religions, including your Bibles and your Qurans. They've implemented caste systems basing rank on color of skin rather than on spiritual ascendance. And I guess as we keep getting into this, the list goes on and on about basically they change the spiritual system in any way they can to not reflect the truth. And they put
seems that they externalized the knowledge that was originally internalized.
Absolutely. I guess that's one of the big keys to this is the externalization. How now it needs to be an external show or appeal of the power. So to say you have power means to rule over a lot of people. To say you're wealthy is to have a bunch of gold. Versus to say you have power back in the day meant that you had control of your kundalini. You could go into other expanses. You can activate the siddhas. right? And to say you had wealth and abundance would mean that you had the ability to create children, you had lots of fruit, you know, so now abundance is money in the bank. That has no value in the ancient setting. So we can also see how these fake Brahmins come in and they set up the banking, they set up all these external systems that try to measure us based on external things, just like the skin color. And so that's, you know, this is a very, I'm glad you brought that up because it's a very important topic to hone in on, is that everything becomes basically external. Everything becomes a dependency on technology.
And once we're looking external, and we begin to see or perceive that others have something that you don't have, where are we at now with that?
Well, I guess we need to, let's see how that kind of rolls out, right? So right now, and again, this is a very powerful symbol. So I wouldn't want anyone to bypass just the awareness that this does not belong to this culture. And the reason why it's so important to know that, though, is because you now see this symbol everywhere and it has been completely desecrated. So this no longer means the father and then the mother interlacing in the connection, the which is what this symbol actually means. It now means basically wars and a specific group of people who have taken this symbol as their own, right? So that becomes very clear. The second thing is, go ahead.
Can we give a quick framework and honor a question that came through?
Yeah, why not? If it's relevant to the topic, which I know it is, if you brought it up.
just to put it within some sort of framework, if it's appropriate, there's a question asking if this information is coming from the Dravidian framework.
Okay, so this is somebody that is okay. So let's take it. Let's talk about it just in general. This word Dravid, as in Dravidian, gives us our word David. Okay, so who is this? This is King David, but who is this really? Actually, King Dravid, which is Murugan. So in that text, I guess I could say yes, that the Dravidian culture is the same as the Tamil Nadu culture pretty much. Now remember, even they have gone through, they are living right now from north to south India in this mess. So all their scriptures have actually been changed. The caste system is in place. There's untouchables, the darker Indians are held down. So there's all of that going on. So when we say, is this a part of the Dravidian culture, but we're looking at the Dravidian culture from a modern book, I would say no. If we're looking at the Dravidian culture from Sanskrit or a Sanskrit explanation of it, I would say no. But if we're going to go back to the ancient Tamil and then say this is connected directly into the Dravidian or Dravid's culture, then I would say yes. So, you know, just some real specific demarcations.
Was one of the kings post-Deluge that you referred to.
Right. Murugan was a king that survived the Deluge, who later on became known by many names. And that's an entire episode because it actually gives you the story of who Hiram Abif really is. It gives you the story of why the world feels godless or fatherless until the sons completely wake up. It gives you the actual pretense of secret societies, warlike clans, martial arts, when it becomes time to protect things. So it gives us a lot that we won't be able to get into today, but if we want to put a name on it, Murugan is a king. And the acts of Murugan and the things that he's doing is being directly plagiarized by the fake Brahmins after his removal.
Got it. So is there any more symbology that you wanted to hit on associated with the fake Brahmins to move us forward?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
So we now have found this connection again with Murugan and the six-pointed star, sometimes called the Star of David or sometimes called the Seal of Solomon falsely. Now we must look at another symbol, because I think one of the main questions that we wanted to answer within the pretext of what we're talking about today is how the ancient culture changed and who changed it. So that's kind of like a really direct question that you just can't point one finger and say, they changed it. You can only look at the most powerful symbols in cultures and see who owns those symbols today mentally. So when it comes to your mind, if you had to answer right away to the best of your knowledge, who does that symbol belong to? you're going to say, oh, that's the symbol on the star of the flag of Israel. That represents Judaism. If I say, who does this system belong to? You're going to say, well, Hitler used that during the Nazis because he said that they were Aryans. Okay?
And it's very interesting referring to these symbols, these external representations that have meaning in terms of ownership and who owns them.
I guess when you change concepts and ideals into, let's say, seals themselves, okay? So, because what did this seal mean? Like, this seal also means the great arms of entire constellations that are out in the cosmos is what this means. And when that's moving in one direction, called Widdershins, certain things happen. And when it's moving in the other direction, Diesel, other things happen, right? So, as a concept, this becomes a very easy symbol, like you're teaching children, and we talked about this yesterday. When you have symbols, it's like when you're trying to create a structure of learning for children, which is anyone who's just being initiated into these arts. So there's this whole process that they need to go to try to understand it. So we must, just like language, which is external, we must bring out this external symbolism to create ideals or maxims that really control how the people function in everyday life, like the 4 seasons, the 4 winds, the 4 corners of the earth, etc. So that's what these symbols mean. And now when someone wants to represent that, saying, I believe that, I believe the arms of the great galaxy, I believe in the cosmos and all these different things. So they will use that symbol, okay? And that becomes the symbol of your tribe. So I can't see anything negative or imbalanced with dealing with symbolism, because it's like our own technology of preserving core ideals that expand out into volumes of knowledge. But I can see, if someone actually takes control of that symbol and says it belongs to them, how entire cultures get left out and entire ideals become forgotten.
Got it. So these symbols are opportunities for us to definitely internalize their meaning.
Exactly. Well, any person, just like what this page shows you, the crow, you know, the fly fly, like all of those names, the manji, you can yourself go to these ancient cultures, see what it meant to them, and gain massive knowledge that has nothing to do with racism and a group of people that are trying to exterminate humanity. Okay? And then I guess this is the biggest example. This symbol is sacred, and it has multiple layers of knowledge embedded within it for those who can go deep enough within themselves. But if you want to take the different meaning of it, then you can go with that.
Well, I love the word insight. So do we want to hit some more of these symbols in terms of insight?
Now, I would say no, only because they're maxims. We need to give them the space that they need to be a complete dissertation. Like I said, like this symbol in itself, the swastika that we're looking at, it stems into the arms of the galaxy. But just like the arms of the galaxy are very broad, there are things that it's circumferencing that all have meaning. Likewise, if this is spinning in one direction, it actually means the direction of life. If it's spinning in another direction, it actually means the direction of death. So, of course, if you knew the symbolism, you would notice that Hitler pointed his swastika in the direction of death. And that, of course, makes sense since they worship the cult of death. But a general onlooker is going to not notice those subtle differences. And then in addition, when we say death, we're only talking about transmutation. We're not talking about the ignorant misinterpretation of death as if there's an end to something that has no beginning.
And since you mentioned who is this, or what is this cult of death?
Yeah, that's a good one right here. Let's see what this next one has for us here. Well, the first thing that we need to kind of look at before we dig a little deeper into the cult of death is just why someone would want to bring about death. Like, I guess that's the first rate of things. Like, as a human species, as a race, as a collective group of people, whatever you want to call it, we probably wouldn't want to destroy ourselves, right? So who would want to perpetrate something like that? And it's unfortunate that some have taken on that side, but it's fortunate for me that we're aware of who is doing that or what groups are doing that, and so that we could put some brakes on it. So let's just read this here. And this is pulled directly from Wikipedia about the Sanhedrin. Now, we know later on the Sanhedrin are the fake Brahmins, okay? But they are worshippers of Kali because they only wear black. If you notice the Hasidic traditions and the Orthodox traditions, they only wear black, right? And that is for a reason. So also, one more note to this is because all of this knowledge, like I said, Abraham and Sarah is really Ab, which means father, Brahma, and Saraswati. These are not even specific people. They're actually titles, but the Bible writes them, because they're plagiarizations, as if they're specific people. So if you think about that, then you read this, it will all connect. So what this says, and then also the last point was that Krishna, or Christ, had a problem with the Sanhedrin. Okay? So through the whole text in the New Testament, who is Christ or Krishna having a problem with? The fake Jews or the Brahmins, the fake Brahmins, the ones that are playing like they understand the spiritual tradition. So you see, they hold the story, but the alterations point them as the ones who are doing the justice, not the ones that are causing the atrocities. And now again, I don't want to paint all Jews with a wide stroke brush. Even now, terms like Caucasian and terms like Jew don't really have too much credibility as far as where they come from and what they mean. The word Jude is a little bit easier to break down, but the word Caucasian was not originally assigned to white people, black people, Indian people, or whatever. It was actually one particular man who saw a skull at the base of the Caucasus Mountain, said the skull is beautiful. This must be where we come from because it's white. But all skulls are white. I kid you not. So you go look at your Wikipedia, see where the term Caucasian came from, and you'll find out that it doesn't necessarily denote that the people that were in the Caucasus Mountains were white. But environmentally, if you're in an area, and this is another point we need to bring up, if you're in an area where it is not getting a large amount of sunlight, there is no need to have a sun modulator, which is melanin. Melanin modulates the sun so that way you can cool yourself down or you can gain more warmth depending upon the fluctuations of the environment. Versus when the environment is always cold, there is no need for fluctuation. Thus, the melanin will be bred out of that being in order to allow them to adjust to their environment. And this is no different than the grizzly bear and the polar bear, which are exactly the same species, except for the grizzly bear lives in a climate where it is hotter and they need that modulator. And that's why their skin, their fur, and everything is that color, versus the polar bear, who is up there in Antarctica where the temperatures are always the same, Alaska, etc. It doesn't need that modulator. So you see the difference in colors. So we hope to allow people to understand how much environment really controls things. And we will talk about that later in our other episodes about the Yugas and how Yugas are governed by environment. So let's get into this very, very briefly. What we're seeing here, that this term Nazi, now the sheer fact, let's slow down here right away. The sheer fact that the Jewish Sanhedrin would have their highest representative named Nazi, with just an S instead of a Z, is appalling. Because if these atrocities and things really happen to the degree that they happen, you would think that you would totally disassociate yourself from anything that sound like the conqueror or the person who despoiled your people. Okay, so let's read this. There were two classes of rabbinical courts called the Sanhedrin, the Great Sanhedrin and the Lesser Sanhedrin. A Lesser Sanhedrin of 23 judges. Again, we have judges. What was Moses? Moses was a judge. He's the one that gave more judges, 12 judges. Now, all this stuff is Brahma and the constellations of the zodiac, but they want to bring it out into an actual story. So supposedly Moses, who was an elder, was also initially a part of the invention of the Sanhedrin. And these 71 judges, which among others roles acted as the Supreme Court, taking appeals, and from cases they decided by lesser courts. Now, this is the exact system, by the way, and I'm butchering it up as far as the linguistics, but this is the exact system that actually exists today. This is why the word judge has J-U in front of it. This is why judicial has J-U in front of it. That is the Judean system, okay? So this idea of judgment is coming from this culture. And it says, in general, the Sanhedrin without qualifier normally refers to the Great Sanhedrin, which was composed of the Nasi, N-A-S-I, who function as the head or representative president, and was a member of the court, or the Abidin, which was the chief of the court, who was second to the Nazi, and the 69 general members, the Mufla, which by all means, that probably just means mafia. So what we're talking about here very clearly, just so you know, we can center into exactly what we need to bring here in a moment, is that you do have a group specifically that are representing themselves not only in black as the worshipers of Kali and death, as Nazis themselves, even though they say the Nazis are the ones that gave them the most problems, and as judges of the world, and even erecting courts to judge people, just like the end of the Bible ends with a judgment day. Okay, so, you know, without exhausting this topic, I guess we can keep moving on, but maybe there's something that we need to clarify more. What do you think, Isaac?
Well, I asked myself, why would we set ourselves up as judges in an external sense? And who might do it? And you said Krishna has some issues with the Sanhedrin. I heard Krishna had some issues with another fellow or another type named Shaguni.
Yes, the Saguni type. So in the Mahabharata, because again, your Bible is directly plagiarized from so many texts, you are not getting the truth. So you have to go through all the texts that actually contain the truth and then start putting all the pieces together. And that's what we've done. That's why it takes so long to do that, though, because you need to have a certain level of awareness. So in this tense, what we have is a specific character known as Sakuni or Shakuni, depending upon how you want to pronounce it. It is in your Wikipedia as S-H-K-U-N-I. I actually even spelled it different here because this is how it's generally spelled, S-A-G-U-N-I. But Sakuni, which we like to just call a type of person, like, so that way we don't like try to paster one race with a specific issue and blame it all on them. But we want to bring and highlight some real aspects or traits that give you an idea of what you should be looking out for when pouring through this knowledge. And we've dubbed that in our own little club, the Saguni type. Okay, so I have some images here that basically show you the original Brahma. Okay, this is like a statue that was pulled from one of the first temples, so you can kind of get an idea of what Brahma looked like originally for these people. And then you see what I call the transitional Brahma, aka Santa Claus. Give me one moment. All right, here we go. So again, let me go over that just one more time. So what we have here is the original Brahma pulled out of a temple thousands and thousands of years old. Okay, and that's the depiction. The next stage is more of like something done in Photoshop. And here we get the transitional Brahma, which is aka Santa Claus. You start seeing the process of the appearance of Brahma and has people recognize Brahm changing. Okay, as the caste system, of course, is now in place. So Brahm has to be this color or he's not Brahm. And then the final metamorphosis, which I call the modern false Brahmin or the Saguni type. And the reason why he got chose today is because that look on his face, which is kind of common for people who practice this kind of tradition to really despise others. It is in their doctrine. So this is not, as they would try to make it sometimes, a witch hunt, somebody talking about their culture. That is their smokescreen. They built the Anti-Defamation League to continue to shield them so they can continue atrocities, because anytime someone says something, they need to walk on tiptoes about who they're saying this is about. So I like to say it's a type. So instead of saying it's the Jewish people or those who recognize themselves under that title, we're talking specifically about those that are initiated into the priestcraft of Kali, known as the fake Brahmins. And this is what you're looking at right here, a Saguni type. As we go forward, I'm showing you a little bit more of the Saguni types. Again, the Saguni types always come in a certain motif. Now, I'm not saying, especially on the people on the right, the left, we already know what's going on. That is the cult in itself. That is now, they're in full action. They've now hooked up with some of the Oriental Chinese to moderate their country under Confucianism. So all this is full blown in what you're seeing on the left, but you're just recognizing that this is a secret priestcraft that uses secret symbolism that you will not know the meaning of unless you're initiated with them. And then on the right, rather than saying that these gentlemen, which are druids, are actually practicing the dark arts, which I will not say, I just want you to understand that that motif of a Brahmin, the Santa Claus, if you may, is shared throughout these cultures of the spiritual learned men. Now, I know that can also be seen as, hey, when you get old, you grow a beard anyway. But what I'm saying is they always take on the Brahmic motif because it is central to the component of being Brahm. Okay? So we got anything that we want to finish dancing over in that before we move on?
Yeah, just I guess one sentence of the summary, the concise summary of the connection between the Saguni type, the Brahmins, and the corruption of the spiritual sects of India and Asia.
Okay, well that again makes us have to rewind just a little bit to actually explain a little bit about Saguni and his role in the Mahabharata. But more importantly, let's just let's just keep moving through this and then we'll actually answer your question, because I see our next slides that are coming up and they actually get into this. So let's just recap for just a quick second here and realize that there's another person that has now entered the picture here called Saguni, and the Saguni type is a fake Brahmin. Now, a little backstory on Saguni, which I think is necessary, is for us to understand like what the setting of the world looks like during this time. Now, because the environments are changing everything, we've come down from the mountains, we're now into the forest, trade has began. And because trade becomes so instrumental to how, first of all, trade only begins when someone has something that you don't. Let's just be clear here. So in the first Yugas, there was no trade because everyone shared the same thing. There was plenty of abundance. So there was other things to really be drilling into beside how am I going to get some beads from Nova Scotia and some necklaces of amber from wherever. Okay, so but after a while, as we hear about the Silk Road and those kind of operations, we know that this entire area that we were looking at on the map earlier, which is here, actually was one of the largest trade routes in the history of humanity. And that the trade between all these nations, the central place is actually in this area. Now, if you think about this gives us a little bit more credibility. I didn't actually think about this until just now. You see how this entire country borders the ocean? This is the perfect setup for trade. They say even like Easter Island or whatever had a name that meant the island, basically an island surrounded by water that you could board. So because everybody traveled around in ships, there was no cars. So if you see the geological position of this particular landmass, you can definitely see that there's trade access all around. There's trade with Africa. There's trade with all these different countries that you see in this nucleus. Okay, and because of that, you have people coming from other countries, including Saguni, who are seeing the wealth of this empire, which gives us names like Candy. Candy, of course, I believe personally was named after when you put your hands in the river, because they said that's how it would be. You put your hands in the river, you pull up a bunch of rocks. You got sapphires, you got emeralds, you got all these different precious metals, and it looks like candy, hence the term Candy. Even one of the most powerful families was the Cola family, spelled different, but probably gives us Coca-Cola today, as this nation is continuously plundered for all of its wealth, its linguistic wealth in history, its sciences, its people. Every single thing you can think of has been despoiled in this empire and brought to us today by another group of people as if it's theirs. So again, just to center around that this particular area is also a strong trade route, then enters Saguni. And we talk about what is a Saguni type. And that's here. So this is important because we have to realize that, let's say, for instance, if you have your stuff together, everything's working, your nation's strong, you may get some coming in envying that. Some feeling like Saguni type, insecure, feels others have something they don't, and they will do whatever to get it. Saguni type uses the dark arts such as cunning, lying, cheating, gambling, and prostitution to supplant and get what they feel like they want but does not belong to them. A Saguni type uses one's customs to gain a foothold on them. The Saguni type will use marriage, contracts, religion, and tribal beliefs to manipulate. And the reason for this is, remember, even to this very day, if you go to indigenous tribes, some of the superstitions they have are pretty far out. So, but they believe it. and they believe the essence of it. And nobody is there to say if this is going to be right or wrong. So we're not into trying to judge that today. What we're trying to highlight is that if a Saguni type comes into that area and sees that the belief of the people is if you wake up with your face blue, then you're the leader, Saguni would figure out how to make his face blue. Now, instead of such a, let's say, loose examples, let's look at some of the real examples, which we actually find several accounts of that I wasn't able to detail all of them, but we'll go through them real fast in the Bible. So Abraham, who we know now is the fake Brahmin, offers to the Nasut Bitti, who we know was the Kemetan Pharaoh. Nasut Bitti means Pharaoh, but Pharaoh is a later word that came on. So Nasut Bitti was the original pharaohs, the leaders of Kemet. So what is being talked about here is actually symbolic. It doesn't even have to be an actual physical event that took place. But the Brahmin, who's the fake Brahmin, offers Pharaoh, we'll say in the text that everybody knows, his wife, Sarah. Now we know now where all these terms come from, but let's be the flies on the wall and read what's happening here. So during this process in the Bible, after this occurs, Pharaoh has this dream and it's horrible. He's basically been cursed somehow. And he realizes in this dream that this is connected to this woman that he just married. So he goes back to Abraham and he says, hey man, is this your wife or something? And then, of course, Abraham says, yeah, it is. And he said, hey, what kind of shit is this? Why would you give me your wife to sleep with? And then he goes, well, because, and this is according to their own accounts, because if I didn't give you my wife, I would assume that you would kill me. And then the Pharaoh says, why would you even think something like that? We've showed you we've showed you nothing that will give you the idea that we would kill you. Now, all this is symbolic. Okay, so what's happening here, so that's one tense. They're just showing you that cunningness with wives. Now, it was known that Saguni actually brought a woman in that was from Russia, which we're recognizing today as Russia. And because this woman was so beautiful, he was capable of getting her married into one of the Raj families. And that's how he gained a foothold in this area, to the point where Saguni actually has a temple in India right now. Okay, so these are real people. This is real things that happen. These are not metaphor. This is not mythology, and this is not always a metaphor. But notice how that's why mythology started, is because you get these real stories mixed in with fake stories, and it's just confusion. Let us go down and confuse them. You see, so this is also what we have to pick through some of the times. It's like slim pickings. For the last 10 years, I've been trying to pull apart all of these different aspects of things and also going through the emotional response of experiencing these atrocities. So to narrow it in, we also have another situation where Jacob's mother is literally written about in supplanting Esau's birthright, which is known to be the war between the Israelites and the Jews, or the Israelites and the Arabs, which is another fake war, a false flag, but that the birthright was stolen by tricking the blind husband into believing that he was blessing the other. Now, what is this, is what I'm saying. How can this be called holy? One more example, Solomon trips Belkis, who's the queen of ancient Lanka. That's why a lot of people don't really recognize, they just call her the Queen of Sheba. Where's Sheba at? Because her name is not Sheba. Her name is Belkis. Where is she from? Belkis means the god of kiss. Okay, what is kiss? That's another story. But Belkis was a warrior queen from ancient Lanka that Solomon, again, this is metaphors, Solomon tricked her into sleeping with him. And the story goes that Solomon thought that, well, he did a couple things. He thought that he had heard that she had a hoof foot, so he built like a glass floor so he could see under her dress. Also, he told her that if she took anything from his kingdom, that she would have to sleep with him. But she was like, I don't need to take anything from you because I have everything. This is actually where the root to the word Sarah comes from. It means actually a woman that doesn't need a husband or an owner. So she says, I already have everything. And then Solomon proceeds with a trick where he serves all night this really hot, spicy food. And toward the middle of the night, Belkis is kind of like, yo, I need some water. And she goes in and gets some water and she drinks it. And then Solomon grabs her and says, oh, you took something from me. Now you must sleep with me. So this kind of behavior is a Saguni type. And this is why Solomon and David and these kings in this particular scripture actually connect to the Saguni character in mythologies. Does that make any more sense about Saguni and just how he gets down in the ancient setting and causes this different troubles and confusions amongst these tribes?
Well, I'm hearing a very confused consciousness in the Saguni type. Okay. And I'm also seeing, you know, the tricks of a Saguni type, the ways to sow seeds of confusion, and really to disconnect that could be whole and unified. I'm curious, what does the DNA of a Saguni type? What's in that?
What happens with the DNA when you get involved in Saguniism? Because I think that what everybody needs to realize in this conversation is that we're using all of this as archetypes now. We're not trying to find the specific person so we can go to their grave and spit on it or whatever. This has happened thousands of years ago. There's nobody to blame. But what we want to recognize is we want to recognize the Saguni in ourselves, right? Instead of always trying to throw arrows at something, right? We want to see, how does that exist in me? So the Saguni is often the selfish person. The Saguni is jealousy, greed, hatred, things that we know by common sense are not going to propel us. But when we act and we do that, let's say a lot of people think they get away with that, which segments us into the DNA. See, now when people act in hatred, they think that, well, I'm getting away with it, I'm being rich, I'm becoming rich. This is the idea of the Saguni types now. They feel like, well, we're controlling the entire world. But there is a big thing that's happening that is out of the view of their own ignorance. Because remember, because they're worshipers of Kali, by default, they're going to keep getting it wrong. They're going to keep misinterpreting things. And that's why I don't want deities such as Kali or ideals such as Kali and ideals such as Brahma to ever be tainted by what had happened later on by those who took those names. Okay, so now let's talk about what you just asked. Now the concepts, again, because we talked earlier about the spiritual systems, right? Like what is being taken? What is being taken is, as we know, a spiritual system that just connects. It's the real cabal. A connects to Z. You get from black to clear, and you go through these steps, however long it takes you, and you get these rewards, which are the Siddhas. So everything is laid out. So as we continue, we find that this knowledge is turned upside down. The tower has fallen. And now the people have been routed, just like it talks about in there. They're building a tower. What was that tower? Like, look at the biblical scripture before God goes down and confuses them. What was happening before that? When he was viewing, he said that they were building some kind of temple or tower. And he said, if they keep going with this, read your Bible. If they keep going with this, eventually they're going to scale the heights. They're going to be greater than even me. That's a Saguni type character right now. We need to do something about this. Let us go down there and just wreak havoc. And they wreak havoc through the language. So then as this goes on now, after havoc is is brought about, now, and I guess we're kind of jumping a little further ahead. Let's just go back really quick here, just so we understand these ideals that are being moved out of the way, so everyone gets it. It's the sevenfold spirit, okay? So the only thing that we're talking about here in these stages is glory, honor, riches, all those things that are eventually added to you as you accelerate through your own consciousness. Now, also to bring more authenticity to this color-based system, the exact opposite of this system is exhibited in martial arts or karate today. Why? Because those are arts of death. So you start off in karate with what? A white belt. When you end with what? A black belt and several degrees of that black belt. And it's because the art of life, when turned 180 degrees upside down, becomes the art of death. So this is also how, if you could say it's easy at all, this is how easy it is to take someone's entire culture and turn it on its head. A simple upright pentagram, which means phi, Venus, flowers, lots of other things that we connect to, when turning upside down, means a lot of dark cult goats, all sorts of weird stuff that has been created and put under that symbol. So we just need to clarify very clearly that these stages are also exhibited in the cults of death and the martial arts where people are trained to kill. But the exact same color system, from black to, or from white to yellow to red to green to blue to black, it still is there. So now, since we've understood that somebody has taken this system that means life, turned it upside down and brought death to the world, worshipers of death, like Skullers and Bones, etc. Now we can get deeper into, so what's going to happen? Because I'm not here, because I've been talking about, let's say that in different ways for 10 years. Now it's time to highlight for these people as they need to get their admonishment. Their children are getting it. Some are going to get it. It's going to leak to them, but they need to know what's actually happening because they're doing this. Because it's not something they're getting away with, even though their ignorant minds think they are. It's destroying their DNA, and it has destroyed their DNA. So what I brought up that I felt like was important to tie into all this was the condition of the DNA haplogroup of GM377. Now, I guess everyone, if you're on your own unit, you can go to your Wikipedia, because I don't have that slide, but you can look up this haplogroup and you can see that this actually belongs to predominantly the Jewish race, Palestinian, Lebanese, etc., concentrating in that area and what's actually the statistics of this DNA. Now, to know more about this, like the finer details of what happened to the DNA, you could check out Dan Winter, because he's exhausted the topic about when you lose empathy, you lose the ability to implode your DNA. So that means, and your blood. So that means that all those siddhas that we talked about earlier, it can't even happen. None of them even turn on, because just like a pump in a fusion process that we see it exhibited in physics, so too that happens in our body. Our bodies are the originators of that. They're a perfect glove for the supreme. So what happens is that when you come out of the supreme ideals and you come off the system, you in effect break your own chain. So what's happened with this haplogroup is that this DNA haplogroup exhibits a high amount of disease and a high amount of ailments that don't occur normally with anybody. Meaning that you can have a person in this haplogroup that is the only person in the entire world with that disease or that condition. And what I'm highlighting today, for those that may be a little unaware, is that it's coming from the constant hatred and teaching children to hate, because that's also what goes on in this culture. And the issue is, when you teach a child to hate, it doesn't seem, to them, they don't feel like they're doing anything wrong. They're trained to do that. It's very important for us to understand that. Let's say, for instance, you let your child cuss and use all the curse words and bad words they want. When they use those words, they don't think that they're bad words anymore. Even if other people are like, man, your language is horrible, and they don't feel it's horrible because they weren't trained that way. They weren't given the proper ideals or the template, which is the temple, the template to actually grow properly. So when they miss those steps, this is in effect of, like we saw earlier with this stepping system, this goes in effect of the person actually missing certain stages in the system. By the way, we did forget to highlight that there is now a caste system in place, but I guess everybody probably gets that. And that caste system was based on the original system, but it has to do with skin color. So what we're talking about is, we're talking about when you miss stages in that DNA chain, there's a gap, and that is sickness. That gap is illness. That gap is a disconnection. And those disconnections come from concepts like the chosen people, meaning everybody else is nothing. As it's written in the Talmud, you can steal from them, you can even rape them, and it wouldn't be like you did that to a real human being. That is an atrocity. For that to be still written and to still be accepted, it gives you an ideal that this system is actually in place. This is not just something we're making up. In addition, the only God concept. Gods are humans. Siddhas were only humans that sojourn with themselves to unlock their powers. But the idea that there's only one of them would ensue a concept of racism. That's why we have a racist situation going on in our metaphysical systems, where people believe that there's one being on top of that, and that being rules all the spiritual systems, and it should be under this Illuminati that they've created, right? And then lastly, we have, of course, that you cannot kill your family and expect to live. Because these people who we are ready to embrace, that we have embraced, like we have to realize the Suguni types were embraced by the ancient cultures, the Kemetan cultures, and the places that they went, because they were always jovial people with abundance. But if you kill them, because we're also all a part of the same thing, you cannot live. So this is the reality of what's happening, is that even if they think that they're separate or they're chosen, those who still practice those ideals, who they practice that on is their own brothers and sisters, which subconsciously sends a signal back to their own DNA that they hate their own DNA and all the different things that they believe in and the degrees in which they believe it. They do that to themselves. And this overall tarnishes the appearance, tarnishes the DNA. So to reverse that process, because we love to bring solutions exist before the problem, the children, like sometimes you just gotta let mom and dad or grandma and grandpa just, get it another way. But the children need to actually start working on repairing that DNA. So you Jewish children out there that know that you have these Orthodox practicing grandparents, you have to be more proactive at weaning that virus out of your consciousness. So that's what we got on that. We still got some more slides, but you think there's anything we missed on that?
It's on the DNA.
Yeah, on the DNA and the results of hatred. I mean, I guess there's some genetic degradation, mental imbalances, the curses passed down generations because only DNA can do that. And then the loss of the blood implosion. So, that's some big stuff.
It is. No, it is. And I know we'll be coming in and out of the DNA often in these episodes. But I just wanted to really highlight the connection between words. So we got hate. We got racism, we got judgment, we got division, and ultimately a disconnect of your own DNA, a disconnect of the own stuff, your own cosmic stuff that you are. Yes. Have we arrived at an opportunity to really look at, well, what that is, but the cult of death, to look at Kali?
Yes, we have. As we center in, and I will tell those who are tuning into the line, you might want to get your questions prepared if you have any, because we are getting somewhat to our last 10 slides, and just sending that message out there. So as we keep going, now we're gonna get into a little bit of Kali and the misinterpretations of Kali, and which gives us synonymously the Kali Yuga. And this is most important to remember that. Krishna called it the Kali Yuga for something specific, and it's because it is an age of ignorance or darkness and wildness. But we'll talk about that in just a minute of what that means. Clearly, first we need to define certain words like salam and salim, which are used a lot. As-salam alaikum, Jerusalem, right? Those words actually mean darkness. Contrary to what they're brought out as, they either mean the sun is setting or going down over the ocean. And darkness is about to ensue. So the word Jerusalem doesn't actually mean the city of peace, unless peace goes by my original etymology, which is not whole, divided, split. Okay, so they call Jerusalem the city of peace, but there's never been peace, never. Okay, so because it's not the city of peace, it's actually the city of darkness, and that's what the name means. Because nobody wants to really live in the desert, and if you actually see how it was constructed, basically people were given grants abroad that were part of other cultures that could claim that they were Jews, like Russian Jews, Polish Jews, etc. And they were given this opportunity to come and live in this desert so they can create this new nation. Okay, and that's the story. And this new nation started getting all of the spiritual things tied into it, which is completely false. But as we go further, we start seeing the falsehood, because all the ideas of peace never actually occur. All the idea of connection and unity are not really what that really embodies, right? So if you live in a land, and we've talked about this before, and you bring about lots of hatred, anger, envy, it will become dry. This is like if you're around a woman and you bring hatred, anger, and envy out of any harmonic woman, she will just leave. You will find your place barren. And if she engages in it, her womb will become barren. Okay? So it's important to remember that we're also highlighting the physical conditions that go behind these mental and spiritual conceptions. And you could see it in our world today. So the worshipers of Kali, they wear black, and they come as if they're about peace, when really they're about darkness and death. So that's like our first entry into understanding Kali.
Okay, and there's, that's I guess one side of Kali. Is there more of the, and that sounds like an inverted, maybe.
That's the inverted. That's the inverted version. I'm glad you brought that up. So we need to very quickly interpret the difference between the perfect black and darkness, right? That's where we are, right? So here we are, okay? The perfect black versus darkness and distortion. Now, if you remember that when they talk about Osiris, who is actually Murugan, they say that he's the Lord of the perfect black. And an ode to the people who worship the ode to the perfect black but don't like black people. I mean, it's just so confusing out there right now. But anyway, what perfect black is a child in a stage where it knows nothing. And this is akin to ignorance. Now, if we didn't have such a bad connotation of the word ignorance that we've created through our linguistic system, we would understand that ignorance just means you don't know. So when a person's in a stage of not knowing, they're known to be in a stage of darkness, as if they're in the womb. They have not exited the womb yet. And because of that, they are wild, meaning that anything that they do, they actually don't consider what they're doing while they're doing it. And that's why it got the term or the symbol of Kali. Kali is also in the Kemetan system, the Eye of Ra. And if you remember, that eye was developed because Ra was thinking the people were doing something and needed to create something to spy on them, according to that text, which is also jarbled up. Let's just say it in its traditional sense. This is the beginning phase or the base pillar of creating anything. It has to be wild, ignorant. And the reason why they call it perfect is that anything that it does that we consider, since we're now enlightened, of being wrong, it doesn't do that intentionally. It's not a thought. And that's why it's perfect black. So to be very clear, to be perfect black is like a child that is not aware of anything that they're doing. There's nothing premeditated going on. So even if they kick another person off the roof, they may laugh because there's such an innocence there that they don't know that they're doing right or wrong. That is the only way you can maintain perfect black. And that is the real stage of what Kali is. Now the corruption, or which I call the distortion, actually equates to more of like what you see here in this image, where you have an imitator coming through that same system. In this case, Miley Cyrus trying to emulate, as she does often, Kali. Like just Google Miley Cyrus tongue, and you will notice that in so many pictures, her tongue is hanging out. And this is because she is a devout worshiper of Kali. In addition to Madonna, devout worshippers of Kali, under the symbol of the black dog. As those who have seen the Frozen video with Madonna, that is her initiation video. She is a Kabbalist, but what kind and under who? Well, now we know. Under Saguni's system, the Sanhedrin, Nasi. Those are the only ones still in place and in power right now, taking those positions. So what we see here again is we see that, just to break down the symbolism a little bit, the cult of the black dog, okay? And the reason why that may be difficult to understand is by missing languages like Tamil. Because when you have Tamil, you understand where the origin of these words come from. And the origin of the word Naga, which has a lot to do with these specific deities, actually gives us the word nigga, negro. All those words come from Naga, Nagus, which was mistaken to mean a snake or a serpent, which was a later on derivation of the name. Originally, it meant the dog's tongue. That the Tamil people thought that the tongue of the dog was actually pretty beautiful, and it was the only animal that kind of had the tongue thing going on. So Kali became directly connected to this black dog in theology, and we'll break that down a lot more in its proper sessions, but just to realize that connection, because all of it begins to connect after that. But I think that before we go forward, we still need to cover a couple things before we can just go diving right away into the cult of Kali as it stands today, like the fake Kali. You're going to have to add fake to everything now, and what's going on with that. So do we got some recapping to do first, though?
You know, I seen you start to dip your toes into the one of Saguni's side projects or main projects. With the music industry. So you talked about Miley, you talked about Madonna. I know we have some other options that we could definitely spotlight.
Oh man, we could fill up the entire next 4 hours with it, right?
Absolutely.
So we going to dive in a little bit? Is that what you're saying?
You know, I at least want to just give a glancing overview of some of these pet projects that Seguni has presently.
All right, I'm my pet goat then, because that seems more fitting. My Pet Goat. If you remember, that's the book that George Bush was reading while the towers were dropping to children. And there's a reason behind this, believe it or not, man. This is crazy. Like, you can imagine what it's like to be me. Like, I got to even be the one coming to deliver this. My ass is on the line. So is Isaac's. No, I'm joking. But I'm just saying, we are bringing something out of love. Like, what we say now will affect our futures. We're willing to accept what will happen. We find fulfillment in bringing this. I just want people to know you can't just, all this stuff, this knowledge. Okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? We have to realize that this is the way the world believes. This is the power centers of the world right now. Knights Templar, the banking system, all this is happening right now. Contracts, marriages, all those things are happening right now. Debt-based systems, linguistic confusion, all this is going on right now. Spiritual misconceptions, total hijacking of culture, desolation of fertile land. So this is happening. This is not us in a spaceship recounting actions of Earth. Okay, so let's get deeper. Who's behind all of this? Okay, now we know, and everybody knows that deals in conspiracy, that somehow the Masons seem to be intrinsically connected to this. And even many of them don't even know it. It's like funny to watch the Netflix Mason series. I mean, it's hilarious to me of just how many men can go without study. Like, I am not a Mason. I've not been initiated into any society. I initiated myself into the mysteries of life and self and came to this knowledge. So what happens, though, is that when you join, let's say, these organizations, perhaps what they rob you of the most is your ability to go check back the story. When they got a bunch of Santa Clauses hanging around telling you what the truth is, it becomes very difficult to, even in their system, they don't even allow you to challenge them. But overall, it becomes very difficult to go back and say, well, maybe that person's not right when they're so much older and they must contain higher degrees and know things that you don't know. And what they know that you don't know is actually that they kill Hiram Abif, but we'll get to that the next episode. And that's why the first initiation starts off with you playing Hiram Abif and them killing you, okay? Because that's their act of killing your soul. So who is they, since we don't like to leave the term so broad? Now, Mesem, not the ones that are oblivious to this, not the ones that are not accepted. You got to understand that there's a difference in Masonry. It's called accepted. Is the stage that you would need to be on to rise through the ranks to maybe become aware of parts of this. If you're just a regular Mason, which is not accepted, as a lot of the lodges are not, there is no oath with the king, who is invisible. Right? It means hidden. There's no oath with the king, and thus there's no charge, which is what they call it, to give you any mission to understand what's going on, because you would learn it from the mission that you took, even though it would probably equal you betraying some of your own kind. So let's just say that these are the deepest kept secrets, but when you know them, it all sticks out. So here go ahead.
Just as a taste, just I want to give them a taste and really make a clear connection between the worshippers of death, worshippers of Kali, specifically the thuggy cult, and bring it present with the thuggy life, thug life.
For sure. Yeah, we're going to segue into that. So we got to know who the perpetrators are, though, first. Like, who's the one? How does this get organized? Like, even me, I have to do a radio show. It takes weeks to organize this kind of stuff. So this is the entire world takeover. So who's involved in the organization? Who's involved in the compartmentalization? And very briefly, what we have here is just some etymological connections, just to realize that the word Mesan, which gives us the word Mason, actually is a herder of goats. Now, while you may laugh at that at first, the herders of goats were actually not the broke people back in the day, because there's a lot that you can get from a goat. But a goat has a specific kind of temperament. A goat is actually born with certain things that make it equipped to do battle. There's some things that hang under the chin, which I forgot what they were called. There's the horns, of course. And then there's another thicker piece that if something grabs onto them, that they could pretty much get away without any damage, right? And this is why this symbolism was used and taken, because it also is like ideal for warfare. okay? And this gets us into death war cults. So what we have here is we have an image of Moses who's always depicted as having horns. Excuse me, we went to the end. Okay, well, that's good. It went to the next slide. Who's always depicted as having horns, right? And we pointed this out in past episodes. I introduced about 12 images in modern times of Moses, from ancient times to modern times, and them always making sure they place horns on him, even if it's just his hair. Now, in this picture, it's more telltale because who's next to him? The goats. The goats. And when you start realizing that, that actually Moses is Pan, that idealism of him putting the penis inside the goat, which is a little profane right now to say, but it'll start drilling it in a little bit more for you of actually what's happening in these groups, okay? Because some have said in Masonry, Knights Templar was the smell of a cat's ass minimum of what you need to do. You need to kiss a cat's rear end. That was part of the initiation. In Masonry, there's some goat stuff that goes on that I think we need some more ratings for, you know, like censorships to be able to talk about, right? So let's just say that these initiations take place, and as you see, here he is again, Moses, horns, okay? So it's not me. It's something that is replete because they are in the know. This is a secret society, and they always depict things as they really are, but for the uninitiated, they don't know what that's about. Some people have tried to say this is rays. Those are rays coming from Moses' head. Okay, so that's not rays. So the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because, remember, Moses is always depicted with goat horns. And the cult that we're talking about, the cult of death, actually represents itself under the symbolism of the goat. What we say is sometimes Freemasonry. What we say is the worshippers of Kali. What we can also say is the worshippers of the black dog, who's also Anubis. And all of that goes with that. Now, is that the original representations of these particular entities or ideologies? Absolutely not. But they are the modern interpretation. So just like the Star of Murugan and just like the swastika, they've taken on an entirely different nature, and the world practices in that nature. So do we need to clarify any of that before we move on to the actual music industry side of this?
I believe that sets the table very clearly, connecting Moses the goat with the Masons, with the worshippers of Kali, the cult of death. That goes right into the music industry for me. Absolutely,
because we have to realize that this industry is very proficient in using those Saguni type contracts. They're very proficient in banking and lending, and that gets people into debt, misfortune, and also very interested in utilizing women, especially to lead others astray. And they promote constantly dice games, gambling, killing, and anything to do with death. Here's another fact.
Well, what's interesting also is, you know, it's not like they're just out like salesmen of confusion and death and just presenting it exactly as it is. I mean, you talk about Moses, or excuse me, it's Abraham offering up something very beautiful, right? Offering up his wife. You talk about Saguni using beautiful Russian woman, you know, hey, here's something beautiful.
Exactly.
And appealing, you know, come and get it.
Exactly.
It comes at a cost.
It comes at a cost, though. It could cost you your entire nation. And in fact, we know the conclusion of Saguni, as it shows inside of Wikipedia, as you see here in the picture off to the right, that's a picture that comes from Wikipedia, that Saguni, who's a crypto Jew, that's another term that if you wanted to trace more of this down, like Christopher Columbus was a crypto Jew. That is now known. Crypto Jews are known because they had to basically live in societies of other traditions like Catholicism and pretend that they were Catholics when they were in fact worshippers of Kali in the distorted state. So Shikuni, as we see here, he's actually in a dice game. So in Wikipedia, we got an ancient picture of a dice game going on. What the? Maybe it's not so ancient then. And that's what we need to realize. This is not 50,000 years ago, or those crazy numbers that make us just completely make everything not credible. This is about gambling and cheating. Okay, so what Saguni was doing. Now look at the cats he's got behind him though. That looks like if somebody's not paying, something's going to pop off. Right? So it says, it tells on itself. So Saguni, according in this text, and where this picture was taken from, actually got one of the Rajas into playing in this game, in gambling. And this Raja in particular lost his entire kingdom in a gambling match. It was discovered that Saguni also cheated, which is Saguni's thing, but that didn't matter because the people that were witnessing this held the king in account. Just like I said, Saguni will play on your belief system, spiritual system. So he made the king promise to him that if he lost, that he would pay him this, and everybody witnessed that. And for the king to go against that would be to lose his own people. So needless to say, after the whole thing popped, the king lost his own whole kingdom and did not give it to Saguni. He accused him of cheating, which he was, but Saguni took that and went to other kings and said, hey, this king owes me his entire kingdom by right. He gambled me and lost, but he didn't pay me. I tell you what, if you go in, help me take it, I'll give you a certain part. So Saguni was always like this, what is that, Robert Greene's art of the war and all this kind of stuff. Saguni practiced these techniques. This Saguni is the kind of guy that would get 4 rats infested with Ebola and dump them into a walled village and come back 2 months later to find everybody dead. This was a different kind of warfare back in these days. And so, again, the gambling is often highlighted in the music industry. If we notice the gambling, the killing, this is the imagery that I have for that. If we think about the rape or the rap industry, some wonder where that term comes from. Where does rap come from beside W-R-A-P, which means to tie something up? It comes from the raptor. And this is why many melanin dominant people are used to promote the rap industry, because in the Kemetan culture, it was known that if a person basically died and they didn't really accelerate strong spiritually, they became a raptor. So in this art, I believe individuals such as Lyre Cohen, which means a priest, actually a lying priest by that term, has been able to tap into that level of knowledge and realize that these Phoenicians, as we talked about, the term Naga means those who originally spoke, because at a certain point, nobody had an actual articulated language. And the first ones that had it were the Nagas, or the niggas, okay? And now, because of their experience with the linguistic system, they're capable of pushing out some hella rhymes, if you didn't notice. Black Thought on Funk Flex. It's pretty extensive what's going on in there. There's some rappers like Fred the Godson who can actually rap backwards, which in trying to listen and comprehend what he's saying seems to turn your brain in another direction of reading deeper metaphors. So this art of phonetics is really a talent, which is why we give so much credibility to these singers and to these rappers. But unfortunately, terms such as the GOAT, the greatest of all time, right? That is a Masonic term, right? Killing is glorified. Dice games, you know, I'm sitting on the street, dice games in the street, blah, blah. Who created these? Who created these ghettos? Who's created these hoods, right? Who created where people are poor and don't have any money, where people are not being treated equal, where there's no more gods, where there's no more healers willing to do that for nothing, and if you have something to give, then that's cool too. Where is that system disposed? Well, we just disclosed that today. And that's really the close of the first part of our presentation. And obviously, when we come in the next time, we'll be talking about some deeper stuff, like the male aspects of this. We'll finish off with Kali and, you know, all the symbolism around that. But we need to talk about that mating component, the Shiva, and that aspect and how it's acting out into our world today. So you want to take a moment before we, you know, go into some questions, or you have some final recaps on what we talked about before we get into that next phase?
Just last sentence or
final
two.
Thoughts?
It seems like the whole thing's a rigged deck. You got, you know, Shiguni. I mean, he's rolling the dice with dice made out of the bones of his father. You know what I mean? So it's by any means necessary. It's ruthless.
I mean, Saguni type set up Vegas, Las Vegas, where every single thing that Saguni believes in is all there, like leading astray by women, cheating tables, gambling, all those different things, fighting, warfare, all that is centered there. So this is not something that we don't recognize, but the reality is, do we prefer it? Or do we prefer a world without it? Like a lot of times the question could come in, is all this really necessary for us to get to the next stage? Well, I don't like having those conversations because we already are at that stage. But what I will say is it looks very clear to me that our ancestors only intended for us to keep growing so we can eventually connect with them. And what these are lambs, which were known as basically diversions on your path that may not be exactly central to your growth. So, you know, the last statements on this particular thing is obviously doing your own research, but also remembering that what we're talking about is not so foreign that you can't find it in another place. If it's not Saguni today, then it could be Knights Templar tomorrow. It could be Jesuits. But to realize that that's all one club is the power here. Because then you can start putting things away from you that actually connect to that and you didn't know. Like the fake Brahmins running around the New Age movement, right? These false ascended masters that they keep trying to bring up, Kuthumi and all these characters that we've never seen, never done real alms, never show up to help people. These templates that they say, these geometries that belong to what they even try to claim the geometries. Like there's a lot that's going to come under the microscope here. So I just hope that those who are practicing these arts understand what they're practicing and don't end up under the bus. And then likewise, if you learn something today, maybe you want to go back and tell the people that believed in what you were saying that, hey, I just got some new information and it shows that actually the definition that I gave for that is not correct. I do that anytime that it's necessary. And so, you know, this is an important thing for us all to do together as a conscious community.
Absolutely. And we're gonna start, you know, sharing some notes with each other when we come forward on the other side of this break. Yep. Family, go ahead and get your questions in. Yes. And we'll see you on the other side.
All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to turn on our starting screen, which actually says stream about to start. So if you see that, you know, it could be confusing. So if you see somebody just jump in and say, hey, what's going on? Just let them know we're on a brief break. It'll take about 10 minutes. And then when we come forward, we're going to answer some questions in relation to this. Kind of probably sit down, you know, get myself into the ability to, no, I'll just stand up. It's all good. But 10 minutes, we'll be right forward. Giving thanks to everyone.
If you have a questioning nature and a desire to nourish your essence within you have reached
All right, wholeness, everyone. We're now forward, so we're going to go ahead and continue. And let me just wait for a quick confirmation that this thing is breathing properly and that everybody can hear me. All right, so we're good. You know, the first thing, before we start off with the questions today, I did want to make one statement. And remember I talked earlier about hypnosis. And I've studied hypnosis quite a bit, especially recently, because I found out that after psychology, if you still want to continue that career, you move on to hypnosis. And hypnosis is a much more deeper aspect of dealing with a person's psyche, obviously. And I also found that earlier in life, I was very interested in behavioral science. And I've talked a little bit about body language, which I call the hidden language. It's like a point-to-point system where we suggest to each other what we truly are. And when you start ignoring or recognizing certain types of body languages coming off people, you can learn how to kind of tune that out, which is somewhat of another show. But the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because when you get, like, you know, obviously there's a lot of support in the chat right now. In fact, secret energy is synonymous with support. Like, when I really just mapped out what we do and how we do it, it was like we offer support on so many different levels. And so you could see the support there, but also that support allows us to see the mindset of the collective consciousness. And I just want to remind people that, first of all, this has been 10 years of, instead of believing what everyone says, going and finding out, not just reading it, but sojourning with it, right? So that's been going on. And in addition to that, we're still talking about a subject that involves why children are abused every day, why there's still child trafficking, why most people on this line are in some form of debt, why sovereignty has not been achieved when it comes to being a sovereign on the land, buying your land based on the powers. Meaning, do you have water going through the land? Is there wind on that mountaintop? There's thermals underneath the ground? Because those are all forms of power. And to be sustained, to truly unlock the Siddhas, this is the as below representation of what that would mean. So of course these guys, they're just like, look, I'm going to a cave. Like, and I'm just going to write off half of the bill that Saguni is going to be charging by just going to this cave. So, I mean, it's a real thing for us to realize, though, that why we fight it and we struggle against it, it is the truth. And this is why in the movie The Matrix, he said, you know, some people, they will try to defend this matrix, this fake matrix, the little small little pieces, because there's that one thing just paying them to a heart, like, and a bunch of arrows were shot, and they just feel like that pain. But what that is what mosquitoes can do sometimes, as being the acupuncturists of nature, is they can release something that you're holding that's not yours. And one thing that I will say, meaning those responsibilities and those atrocities, one thing I will say is what I've learned from the greats, which can only be contacted through the perfected consciousness, is that the bigger your throughput is, like how big is your pipeline to go in and out? Can you give out as much as you receive, or do you hold? And what I'm saying about this particular aspect of things, about holding others' energy, which is the banking system, is there's two victims. There's two victims. I want there to be two victors, but there's another victim that, because they're holding that energy, it becomes dead. You ever seen what happens with water when it gets held? It becomes a mosquito nest. Then it becomes dengue fever, and it becomes a lot of other really, really treacherous things. So when they're holding all this money in the bank, likewise, actors, stars, you know, what the roles that you're being given in this dimension, when you're holding millions of dollars in your banks and you're not letting as much come out as what's going in, and you know, you become a throughput, that's the essence to greed. I asked, well, how did so many fall short? And it said, it's greed. And I said, well, how do we overcome greed? And it said, the same amount that goes out, that much must come in, and the same amount that goes in must come out. So it's like me, I'm just like a magnetar. I just push out tons of energy, and then I get tons of energy, but I push it out, and I'm always in this balanced limbo where I got to step up and do certain things. But I'm going to show you a really strange synchronicity that I just found out today, or yesterday night, excuse me, that one of the people that were key and instrumental to causing some of this chaos in the future, like in the more of the modern times, is actually my name spelled backwards. If you remove the H, this gives you my exact name backwards, James, and then you just anagram the last name, Bomar. I remember one time I actually wrote the society of, it's basically the society that actually controls these institutions that teach this higher learning about Brahmism, because I had this weird contact about 4 years ago that was trying to explain to me that I was Brahm. And I wrote in the blog, could Bomar be Brahm? And they banned me right away. And I never got any feedback of that, just like the Kundalini Society of New York. Never got any feedback. Here I am a decade. If you don't see me, it's because you don't want to. There's something you're avoiding. Today, we're disclosing the beginning of that. And everyone, as we go into Satya Yuga, there's not a 25 or 100 billion year more time for a Kali Yuga. No. What the Mayans did when they left is the Mayans wrote the calendar from the point that Krishna told them to write the calendar. So they created this calendar that only exists with approximately 5,000 years to account basically their prison sentence. How long they would have to wait for the learned wisdom to return. And this is it. It's us. It's not me. If I go right now, it will transmute to others still, and it will keep coming out. There's other people like the guy who I'm going to show you who discovered Atlantis, right? Or not discovered, rediscovered, but he's just instrumental in bringing that. He has 600,000 YouTube subscribers. You could be very instrumental in things changing. So I just wanted to let people know just from the heart, though, because I see the conflicts. This is about coming together. This is about us all agreeing on something so that we can move on. Once we recognize the integers that are happening here, remember, you have like the OTO and the Golden Dawn. Some have went deep into darkness trying to find the light and are trapped in there. I've seen beautiful people a part of organizations where there is no bottom to that chamber. And remember, California as a word, which gives us Kali, is the place where the sun sets. So if you need to keep connecting things with etymology, you would understand, of course, if they wanted to bring some distorted form of darkness, they would set up their stronghold in a place that means a vault of darkness, which is what California means. Now, are we saying something is bad about darkness? No, not when it's perfect black in innocence, which is ignorance to the facts. But then when you premeditate, which is what Hollywood is, that's why Eliezer was so instrumental in setting up Hollywood. Houdini set up his magician society in New York. These are all the same people in Nucleus. And I'll tell you, if I leave this world, it will only be when everyone comes to know this truth and returns to themselves. Now, all of these people, we're just getting all of us an opportunity here. Truth, when it comes through, it's not going to be something that is going to be able to be stopped. And this is, so these are the first mains, if you may. They say, like J Electronica says, to be a great main. What is a main? A main is a night horse. That's just where the term nightmare came from, but it was against darkness and distortion. It was hell on them, meaning that there were guardians stationed around the temples using martial arts, which is yoga and meditation, to defend the mind, to defend the kingdom within the temple, and then to perfect oneself and to go and assist others in doing the same thing. That is what we embody. That is what it is to be a part of what this is about here. But the interesting thing is that you are already. So I would tell some of those teachers, especially the ones in the chat, if you were here as a teacher, then maybe you sit down and get taught for a minute. I would love to sit down and get taught. I sign up every time I can to get taught. My range is all into other categories now. Like I said, behavioral science shows you the problem in the chakras because the person's always wearing that problem in their disposition. So if you're not just using it to find out if a person's lying to you or not, which is totally much more easier to tell by other integers, or if they're a good person, whatever that means, if you're using it to actually heal them, you see by their disposition when they learn predatory capabilities, like never closing their eyes. Like Donald Trump never closes his eyes when he blinks. He always leaves it slightly open. That is something you breed back into your DNA. So what I'm saying is the vaults are open of knowledge, but above the door of the temple, it says know theseton, meaning know yourself, not everybody else, not other people's numbers, because what's happening is that many people who are still in this resistance, that's what ohms is, it's resistance. Now they're still in this resistance by coming up with all of these things. They still have to remember that that is the force that actually creates joules, it creates energy. So our world works, just so you understand how power works, which they got backwards, is that it comes from negative to positive. They still write it backwards, meaning it comes from resistance, and that's what creates power. So at this point, now everything is collected for us. And as we walk up this ladder of lights, as we climb our own spine through the ancient system, like, why do I want another one when I have the original? Through this ancient system, walking up this ladder and find out what this means. These are not people, these are ideals. Many people have tried to be Kali. Many people have tried to be Brahma, etc. But the reality is, this is not about trying. This is about succeeding. And we only do that together. What it shows is like that blown up planet into bits, the Milky Way, that's us. And so now we have opportunity to pull all that back together. Our brother came in and he was just talking about that. He was only talking about just the Milky Way, the galaxy. And he said, man, you know, the explosion and all this stuff. And I said, but how do we bring all that back together? And we just sat. We just wanted to actually see if our consciousness could come up with a reality. And I said, well, start using the laws, magnetics, pull it all in together. And I said, what does that mean? It's what somebody's got to attract. Somebody's got a light so resplendent that they actually begin to attract all those beings back together. And that's what we are. It's not just one person. It's all of us. So we're going to go ahead and start answering some questions. I just want to make sure, especially if we dip off the line and we speed through these questions, you know, as proficient as we can, that maybe I just keep referring back to what I said right now, but you get it. Let's get out of the hypnosis. Stop remote controlling yourself, feeling like if something happens, it's not going to affect you. Get into truth. Just because you've yoked yourself with others that are also taking it from others, also taking from it, examine what web you're actually hanging on in the abyss and realize that you always have your brothers and sisters. My lesson's always been non-judgment. I'm so proud to be here today to be able to bring a message that covers everybody's story. No ratios. None of the, oh, this one's a pentagram and this one's no ratios, no geometry. It does not exist where we're from. And just to be able to transmit that purely in this day and time, 2018, it comes across to you and you'll spread it. YouTube will keep sharing it, selling it. I almost said that because they will sell your stuff. Facebook, they'll keep pushing it. Sovereignty 2020. This month, we have an amazing thing rolling out. And you get your notifications. If you get on the site, sign up, check your emails. But this is a really powerful force, and it includes everyone, and we're scaling it up. So what we got, Isaac?
All right. So does all of this history, this story that we're delivering, does it lead to unconditional love?
What is that? What is unconditional love? Selfishness? See, when you know all is self, ultimate selfishness is selflessness. The woman preserves her child for the feeling she has with her child, for the connection she has with her child that exists beyond even death. But isn't that kind of selfish? So the reality here is that it keeps winding and turning on itself. So if you got unconditional love, you got unconditional hate existing in that same framework. What this leads to is it leads beyond the labels. So I'm sure we can clarify things by just understanding where that clear phase comes in. And we didn't really talk much about clear phase. Me and a great friend of mine, Jason, we used to have a joke about it. We called it clear face. And now I realize what it was all about, because that clear face, it often goes unseen. Nobody talks about it. Nobody knows about it really, because it exists, and it's here around us, but nobody has actually seen it, hence clear. So we see that final phase, and let me just take control back of my screen here, but we see that final phase is clear. 2 minutes here. And what that final phase gives us, let me see, where's my rest of my notes here? Okay, I see what needs to happen. Just give me 1 second. There goes Joe. Somebody called Joe. Tell him it's on. And I've been talking to him for years. Hey, man, when you going to have 7 Bomar on? No response. But he's cool, though. He'll come around. So, clear. That definitely ain't clear. In our final phase. Okay, so basically what's happened is that my little link has come undone, so my little remote control link, so I'm just going to click it manually and go manual on them. So if you notice here, there's a clear phase in the end. This is nirvana. This means that you can't actually distinguish between things anymore. There's no more judgments. Like if you're eating something, you can't taste it really. If something hits you, you don't feel it. So you don't stay in the world long at that point. But it's all important for us to see that there's a clear phase. There's a, like we talk about, we call it the neutralist. It's the last phase of ideology. Now you've learned, like Yoda says, now you must unlearn. So in the end of the game, the king and the pawn must go back in the same box. So you got to be able to unpack all this stuff and be clear to pass on into the everything. So when you want to give titles, does this mean unconditional love? Well, that means certain things to different kind of people. It's such a crazy conversation if you ever have a talk about it. We had a post about it, and the post just ran in circles between selfless and selfishness. So I hope that clears up things. What's the next question?
Cool, and it leads us into the next one.
Okay.
And we're going to get into a little bit of design on chakras. We have a question about the spinning of the chakras, if they all spin in the same direction, how you can tell if they're spinning properly. What do we got for design on chakras?
I would definitely say, you know, it would be great to check out even some of the previous videos or even get into the university to really see how the system works, because it works in conjunction with everything. Like if you could imagine a ball spinning, just a ball spinning in water, and you're trying to figure out if it's going up or down, it's pretty difficult because you have like a 360-degree sphere to consider rather than just a forward, back, left, right. So how the chakras spin is it works as a centrifuge, dialing in itself with its wavelengths, whatever it's being designed to project. So it's not like a specific, they move up, they move left, they move right, they move down. That it's so unique that it needs that key. Now, how can you tell when they're blocked? When you're asking that. No, but serious. It's one of those things where there's blocked or unactivated parts of my consciousness right now. And I will see those unlocked in a progression. So we can all assume that we have some kind of closed center that is taking place. Now, if the question is, how do I unlock my chakras, then, or unblock them or heal them, those kind of things, then that's what I will refer to the university and other material for, because it is lengthy. You look at your diet, you look at, you know, how you can augment your metaphysical growth based on your time. What is your time frame? Give yourself some urgency. All these things, there's stuff that we talk about, especially in ambassador training. We're so close right now in this nucleus. You could jump right into that nucleus and get what we've actually put together for almost 2 years now. It's a year and a half, something like this. And it's there for you. So that's what I would say. It's just a long question to try to answer just properly. So hopefully that gives you enough.
Of course, just a quick minute or two on bringing it present. Any advice to, we just touched on the music industry and we touched on rap. Any advice to rappers who would like to set the intention of being a contributor and not a vampire within that system?
For sure. Like nothing great goes without planning. You know, fools rush in. The reality is that Gucci Man needs to go on a cleanse. Like what needs to happen is it happens overnight. There's no, if you're alive right now, you're ticking and moving right now, there's nothing binding except for the mind, and the mind unbinds itself through its actions. So if you get it, because it just clicks, you just come online. This is the message. Basically, if we look at these sleeping statues of Buddha, what you can imagine in the work that it takes to get a Yuga from a Kali Yuga to the next stage for anybody participating in that process, you want to sleep after that. So thus they got these pictures of Buddha just kind of laying out there sleep. And what that really is it's a part of our consciousness that rests when there's no need for it to be present or to be used. But once it's necessary, it comes online and it already preps a shroud or a vehicle for itself before it comes online, because that's what it's doing in its dream. So let me explain that very clearly. A childish Gambino body can be inhabited overnight by a great ancestor that had prepared their body for the awareness of his consciousness in the stage that the world is yet to be held. And that it only had planted itself like a seed, making itself infinitesimally small, only being acted upon by certain parts of the environ to grow at a certain stage that would bring it in a bud, which is the Buddha, the budding phase, at the perfect time to where all those powers are actually needed. Because other than that, needed here. Because other than that, which is why a lot of people are actually somewhere else but rapidly returning, other than that, there's absolutely no reason to have that much power here for that long period of time, meaning that siddhas, for a few people to unlock them and get on the mission of using them and unlocking others. Earth as we know it, once it's cleaned up and the connection happens with all the species, when there's not oceans going around not oil going around the ocean, when we've cleaned up all the blackness and shined light upon it, which we can do with our technologies, and which are the internal and external technologies that we've learned, then that is when that is the close of the Yuga. That is the close of the cycle. And the interesting thing is that the quantum intelligence mainframe that has been accumulating in our experiences and can be accessed by any being to train to do that is so proficient, it can come with those solutions. And so remember, these siddhas, we quote unquote paid to figure this out. They killed them. So bringing that back alive, bringing it to where you can cultivate people who have a knack for this. Just like some people play instruments very well, some people really can go through languages and linguistic systems very well. So that means that we're inspiring the growth of our totality. So I trust that that makes things a little clearer.
So you dropped Kali in there. We have a question about why do the worshippers of death carry a six-pointed star, and what is the connection to Saturn, as well as the hexagon on the north pole of Saturn?
Okay, well, first of all, you have somewhat of a mess with the symbolism, so I really don't want to kind of put them into that any of their stuff is actually authentic or in line, but I will explain to you that old king who's known as Saturn, who is also known as Hiram-Abiff in the mythological system, the one who is buried in a six-sided box, which is what the old coffins used to look like. Now there's a four-sided coffin, right? Or octagonal coffin, right? So that old system. What is the question? What is the question? What does the person want to know?
Why do worshippers of death carry a six-pointed star, and is there a connection to Saturn?
It's funny. It's almost like I don't know why they're doing it. It has nothing to do with what they're about. No, I'm just joking. So what happens is any time you have and this is like the next conversation for us, or maybe the one after that, is actually about Shiva. So if you can create, you can destroy, right? Widdershins or Diesel. So technically, if you have a creator or a sun, which the original cedar was, if you use that symbolism and try to just turn it upside down. See, the thing about that's interesting about a six-pointed star is when you turn it upside down, it still looks like the same thing. And this is why when they plagiarize it, they try to interlace it. Now they can try to tie, this is when it's right side up, this is when it's around, and that's for the lower level initiates. And then they turn it around and make both of the sides point up for the higher level of initiates as a true symbol that Saturn's been turned on his head. And then once that goes on, then they must create antithesis to the mythos. So if it's a killer, then its element must be that of death. So it's going to be heavy, it's going to be lead. So if you see in the language lead, put a D on the front, you get dead, right? So you got lead and dead. Now, that same lead is used in guns. Now that gun is shaped like an L. So that dealing death is the symbolism of the backward spiral of Saturn, who's seen as the vacuum, or his antithesis is like the Grim Reaper, okay? So now in those ideals, this is like a child basically seeing the void, because Saturn is deeply connected into the void. There's just no bottom. It's the point where you get comfortable with lounging in nothing. And so the initiates of Saturn, the original initiates of Saturn as we know it as a planet, start stemming back to Amen, and this gets us into the next conversation. It starts stemming, which is hidden, meaning this is a hidden priestcraft. It stems into Ra, which actually means nighttime, and wisdom by nighttime. So it basically gets into the opposite of the creation cycle and what must go on there to maintain the decay. And so this is why, so the worshipers of death are just going to go and get the decaying maintenance knowledge and then bring that out. And it does connect to Saturn, but it's like, where's the other half is what we're saying here.
All right, brother. So we're going to really hit this rapid fire coming through these next few questions. So we're going to go for the minute or two on them just so I can get through them and see what happens in that kind of flow.
Let's try it.
Let's try it. Dogon, how does it fit into the Nagas you referred to earlier?
That basically, as far as the Dogon or Dagon or the fish gods, this is symbolism of the kings such as Murugan, who escaped the flood, who themselves were very proficient aquatically, who have boats themselves and arrived on land to uncivilized tribes that had, in this case, not been initiated into the mysteries of language, and taught them what they knew not. That is the connection.
Why, and going with that, why are liars most prosperous in this time, at least from a perspective?
Because the world's been turned upside down. So that's basically everything that's from life will benefit when life is worshipped. When death is worshipped, it will go upside down. So
Good.
a lot.
Speaking of what's been turned upside down, we talked about Kali. We talked about some of the, I guess, the darker aspects of it. Is there a light aspect of Kali in connection with Anubis?
First of all, when we get to Saraswati, that is when we'll see the lighter side of Kali as she grows up. That remember, these are ideals. So who's Kali? Like, Kali is basically a young woman. She's wild. She has to go through the entire process of grooming herself through this knowledge. If she stays in Kali phase, then she will become destructive because no man will want her. So she will destroy men. And this is what happens with a lot of the worshiping that you see going on with the black queens in this industry. I don't want to do no name dropping just in case they want to change their story up real fast. But the reality is there's a dark current running, a dark voodoo current running through also this same field. That is actually the connection with Belkis and Solomon, that there is a lot of pain that is still needing to be healed. And that pain congeals as a blackness in itself. It's like the black spot, they call it, which is connected to the period. So there's a great healing that has to come about as the woman goes through the phase of making herself from a Kali to a Saraswati.
Okay, and just to kind of switch gears for a moment, collective tribal consciousness. It seems that only one person out of a family line will make it to this vibration. I'm assuming they're referring to right here where we're at, the vibration that we're vibing with. It says, should you worry about the rest who are not open? I know we shouldn't, but so what should we do is kind of my question.
Oh, okay, yeah, this one's easy. Thanks for the easy question. Whew. Okay, honestly, how this works is, you know, when you say, well, one out of the family, first of all, who's giving that number? I've never seen a number like that. Second of all, since we just come out of the Kali Yuga, and we've just detailed much of what's been happening, imagine when that's not going on, or imagine when more people are aware of that and what you get after that, which is what we're going to be able to live through if you are able to participate for that next 2 or 3 years as you're going to see it all unfold. So the reality here is that that's an old paradigm. You see what I mean? And the paradigm has shifted. And now we'll watch Earth light resplendent. And the reason why I know this, because where's your facts? Where's your proof? Are you just a wishful thinker? Absolutely not. When I went through the activation, the guy that was in the room with me, when I touched him, he grabbed me, actually. Excuse me, I didn't touch him. He grabbed me because he was afraid because the room was shaking. And he was like, what's going on? And he grabbed me and he went. This is proof that when we come online, people in proximity, they come online too. This guy changed his entire life after that. He grew a beard, he got married. That was opposite to what he was doing before. So the reality here is that when we want to perfect our DNA with our family lines and then finally do that strong enough to connect the whole Earth family together, all we have to do is start, again, working on ourselves, right? You start working on yourself. Then try to grab the closest family member in proxy. Send them some flowers. Start cleaning up what they're thinking about you. You don't got to go into the ideas, like go into like, oh, I'm going to go and get them down there. We're going to talk about this. Start working with just the DNA. That's what you're doing. It's like, instead of like working directly with this person and all this pain and all this energy that you have stuck, start working with the DNA to fix it and just start seeing that. And that's why I say the most greatest power is actually selfishness. Because when you start seeing, hey, that's your DNA, maybe you'll be more eager to actually want to get in there and fix it regardless of whatever the situation may be.
And that's what, that's what we're doing here together.
Yes, that's what we're doing here. We're clearing the space together.
In terms of what else might be going on, as spiritual consciousness develops, will we see spiritual controllers creating spiritual celebrities and gurus? And just my addendum, I think that's where we're already at. Yeah,
basically that's what's going on right now. But the interesting thing is the world's not getting bigger. It's getting smaller. These external technologies are making the world so small. So many people not only know about me, or I know about them, we also have plans or dates in the future where we're all actually going to be at the same place at the same time. So the reality of all this is, as we go further into the future, is that that unity starts spreading much more rapidly, because the ambassadors, if you may, of several different cultures, ways of thought, different beliefs, cities, towns, any kind of nucleus of division, those ambassadors are coming through and representing and getting that power and that message and transmuting it into those communities to bring them online. So this is really a kinetic kind of thing that we see start lighting up, and it's already happening, but there's got to be, and this is where, they call guys like me in. They're like, yo, we need you to go in. I was like, really? Come on, I was asleep. Well, the reality is that there's some dirty work, right? Nobody wants to do the dirty work. Like, I've been sitting in a mess for 10 years when it comes to the spiritual knowledge of this world and trying to weed out demonic stuff from the truth. So now that somebody has actually done that, and we've done that collectively, now we have to actually, you raise it up now. When we talk about Atlantis, we understand just how Atlantis became unstable. But now we need to raise up a platform where our women and children can actually stand on and be protected and feel safe. Before you can learn anything, you need to feel safe first. So raising the platform, what that has a lot to do with is, well, if we haven't achieved it at this point, which is the definition of insanity, if you keep trying to do it the same way, maybe we did miss something. And of course, and I found out that we actually missed quite a bit. And I say we as a conscious community collective, and what people are generally talking about when they have their interviews. So the reality is that this knowledge is like a breath of fresh air to us, because it allows us to, first of all, take something back very powerful that's been hidden, that is the real reason why we're not connected. You now have keys to the ancient language. It's just going to keep spiraling out of control from there. I've done my thing. But the reality is that now we also have to build infrastructure, because second missions, you see what I mean? It's like, now you got to build infrastructure, because as people come online, we're in the transition phase. We want people not to go into a meltdown because they now become aware, like most of us did, like for the last 10 years, 15 years, and even our elders, Mount Shasta, all these people coming online to a world that is not ready. This world is ripe and ready. When you see the intelligence coming across in some of these conversations, like, here's what I'll say. Actually, let's summarize it like this. You see those guys on Red Bull? Don't we always watch like, damn, he just don't care nothing about his life. This shit is amazing. I'm on this side. I'm watching now. Imagine, because that guy is, a lot of those guys are missing one more piece. That metaphysical knowledge. And when you pair that metaphysical knowledge with that fearlessness, see, those kids weren't raised to have fear. They breed it out by doing that kind of stuff. And then they become masters of hanging on the edge. And then when you pair that with metaphysical knowledge, boom, even a few of those guys. So this is what I'm saying. Like, I'm really optimistic, and it has nothing to do with whether I'm standing here or I'm not standing here, about the condition of Earth in a few more years. So let's keep going. And that's the timelines that we're building. We're making that happen, right? So,
Absolutely.
you know, it's not just the belief.
No. Absolutely. And that, you know, that answers the last part of the question that I didn't even ask, which was what we can do to avoid being misled. And it's, you know, it's something we're coming in to do it real time. What are the metaphysical effects of not having children life in your lifetimes? But from the, at least the DNA perspective, and this is my piece on it, you know, all the children are our children.
Yes. Yes, they are. They are our children indeed. And, you know, it's always a perfect opportunity to share that love with some of the, you know, there's so many seeds on the ground. I'll just say it like that. And also remember that when we choose to keep going into the other body, like when we have a child, we now have basically kind of signed in for another round in some way, shape, or form. So some beings have graduated enough to know that no more rounds. So what I would do this life, if you're actually listening to this, is actually let this be the closure of something that you should be looking to get rid of, meaning like all these different ideals and all these different things that happen, you got to graduate from that. So this is a perfect time to just take the DNA beyond this. If there's no direct, let's say, child connection. Now, I think I'm going to get a lot of questions about this, so I need to clarify very clearly. Where, if you can never take everything away from something that has everything. You can't take anything away from something that has everything. Where would you get it and where would you put it? And it's just like what Isaac is saying. All of these children are yours. Wherever you go, we're still going to be there, especially if we're the truth. So see it as a continuum and see the best out of situations that you've been put in life as far as how they're going to impact you in the future and what they really mean. Do not inherit ideals like whatever it is that you have is your curse and it's like your misfortune, you're going to have to deal with it. All that is false. That is part of the distorted ignorance. Even all the way to that haplogroup and to those Jews. I got plenty of Jews friends that are dope. We hang out all the time. They share love. They do their thing. So it's not a generalization. But the reality is for all of us is that it's going to take the real action. If you're not in there loving, if you're not, like I said, doing a massage, like massage your mother's feet, like stuff that, you know, go to the, like my brother Life, you know, go and spend an hour with a child a month, you know, like go downtown instead of just giving away money. Like, oh yeah, look, a rapper's doing his good deed for a day. He gave a man on the corner $500 and like sit down, talk, you know, get something going, not just here and goodbye. So this is the things that we all can do personally for ourselves, and we know where we're needed. You know, you get that call every single day. So, you know, I trust that connects it.
Yeah, and just to you know, further on, I guess the roots of talking about children, we're talking about ancestors as well. There's a question that I just want to throw out there. Are skeletons the symbols of our ancestors?
That's a good question. That's a good question. See, what happens here is that skeleton, as it goes through its composite process, is actually really a crystal. So in every tense, like how things, like I said, the last will come first and the first shall come last, like how it all closes itself is the same way it began. So it's like this is a crystal projection, and that calcium crystalline form that we call a skeleton is when light is placed into that prism orifice and creates phi, and that's the first density. So that's why they talk about like a world where there's only skeletons and everybody's just a skeleton. There's none of the rest of the stuff, and that's really a reference to the mineral kingdom, which is very alive. And the crystalline fields that are accepting the light and then projecting what we call the physical world or flesh.
So there's words that are, you know, just so used or thrown around, overused.
Yes.
From my perspective, and you know, I love words, but I also love not dealing with the words.
Yes, indeed.
So I don't even fully understand this question, but I wanna honor it and get it out there.
Okay.
What is the true name of the quantum state?
Man, I mean, I think that person already knew the question, answer to that question. Anything that can be named, first of all, anything that can be named can be controlled, right? So as we rise in degrees, here's what I'll tell that person. It's not like there is not a name for a state that you can imagine, okay? And as you walk through those degrees of knowledge, it's the feeling that you're looking for, not so much as the name. It's like you don't go back and say, hey, so what's your name? It's more like the feeling is the experience. So I would encourage those kind of people to look at brothers like Kalindi Ili, look at brothers that are and sisters that are going deeper and more intrinsically with themselves and just understand their experience. Like there's the Flying Rainbow Lasagna lady. Just check out their experiences. And these experiences are much more authentic, than trying to detail a lot of things just to kind of get a map before you take the adventure, right? I think what happens a lot of times with us, especially if we don't have brothers and sisters to sojourn with, and that's why we opened up the tribe, is that we can get into like just more, we need more data. I need more, before I go in, I need to prepare. And the reality is that this is internal work. So you're actually not going anywhere. You're returning to yourself. And a lot of that starts again with the diet. It starts with things that actually have nothing to do with this knowledge. This knowledge can actually be quite heavy for a person if they have a blocked spleen and, convex heart. Sometimes you don't even hear what the person's really saying because it's coming through all those filters. So we've done many years of talking to people about, start working on the process of the portals. What you take in, understand what you're taking in is what you're going to put out, and understanding how to transmute things. Understand that whatever you put in, it needs to be clean. And you have the opportunity to do that. Drink lots of water. Do your meditations. Learn whole body breathing. All of those kind of things are so much more central because then that's what gets you to those states. And I guess that's why I'm going off on this like this. That's what gets you to those states. And then when you're there, it's a whole different thing. You realize that shit, there's nobody that would have ever gave a name for this. This is like Lars said, this is like trying to explain to you how pizza tastes. Just eat it. You know what I mean? It's like the cosmos doesn't want to be named. It doesn't want to be wrangled. And as far as people trying to figure out what the ultimate name of it was, whether it was, it was always, remember the ancient language, because you can find this out yourself. I'm not trying to shun your question. The ancient language was always an expression, something that was actually seen and really felt that way. So it probably sounds like, like when that ultimate relaxation of the world, because we're symbolic as Atlas, which is our next course. So Atlas carrying the world. So when all those organs that you're carrying and all of that weight and imbalance all lines itself up, there's an and then that's when the pineals and all these other forms and systems open. So I trust that will give you more of what the name is as a real explanation. Also realizing that the word name is an anagram for Amen and just means hidden in a secret place.
We're winding down to,
yes, we are.
There's not many questions left. And I know we're nearing the end of today's stream. So just, I know, right? Just a final invitation. If you're trying to get some questions in, get those in now.
Absolutely. We have some, I do have some announcements if we're ready for that. Or. First and foremost, in closing the conversation, giving all honor and respect to the ancestors that allowed this to be broadcasted to all the human race. Finally bringing us in union with, no matter how much we struggle against it, something that's going to end up wrapping us and something that's going to bring us together and allow us to see how much we truly love each other is great. It feels comfortable for me. So the reality also is that now it's all about action now, because work still needs to be done. It's only how many people on the stream, so share the message. If you're not a subscriber and you liked it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It does really help gain traction. Also, we have ambassador training. This is if you need that one-on-one, two-on-two, 10-on-10, whatever, of those who can really assist you in building this, they're there. Also, we are coming in with some amazing metaphysical augmentation. So it's never been for me just the conversation. We create things. And right now, we've taken the last year to completely redesign our entire platform so that we can have together our own form of currency, a bank, if you may. So the reality is we're actionizing things. We've got real game theory. We know about AI. We know about VR. We know about all these different high levels of technologies, and we see their metaphysical connection. So it's really important for everyone to get involved. You know, there's the Discord chat, or the SE chat as I call it, and that is the place that we connect. And then also we have projects that are unfolding all the time. And so just look out for what's happening, because this is a special time. And if you gravitate towards this knowledge, then it's a whole 10 years sitting right in the queue in the videos. But if you wanted to condense some of that, we do have the university for you to join into. So I just wanted to say again, wholeness and balanced vibrations. For those that tuned into the conversation today, much love. Like, there will be things that even when I get off the conversation, I'll be like, I wish I said that. So all of those things too. And, you know, to the moderators who've done an exemplary job, you know, just really showing just with their own essence and their own time and energy, how much they care for you. You know, that's not something that they actually have to do. And also see how we love to just bring the harmony, but we have this time to sojourn with each other through some semi-tough scenarios and, you know, some things that have happened that we really need to come out as adults. This is what allows us to become adepts. This is what allows us to go from boys, even you got 50-year-old, 60-year-old boys running around still, to what we would say is a king or a divine masculine, which is a foundation. You know, to really be a foundation for this world. And then also remember that women have a masculine side. Men have a feminine side. So the reality is we're not genderizing this. We're seeing what is behind the eyes. And that's what we're connecting with.
And we are stronger together.
Yes, we are.
And the
yes,
disconnectivity.
Division is not an option.
The division and the disconnectivity of the deluge, past and present, the disconnectivity in the DNA, it is an opportunity now for us to start offering up connectivity to each other.
Exactly.
And that's what we're offering here.
Exactly.
So wholeness.
Wholeness. So I guess that's it. So we'll see you soon. Also look out for Secret Energy TV. It just comes live. You get notifications. We'll have Keymakers come in the moment we can get it formulated. Maybe it's the same time, maybe it's not. But in between then, you have a lot of portals to connect with us. Man, all the best. Wholeness.